Human culture thrives when discussions about what is true, what is just, and what is beautiful is remembered as an ongoing, never-ending, never-complete conversation. To quote Milton, by the known rules of ancient liberty, welcome to Risky Conversations. I am your co-host, Ace Deliri. Join us as we engage in this ancient tradition of discussions around interesting topics with utterly fascinating people.
Well, welcome to Risky Conversations, Matthias. Let's just start with a simple question. The first one we got was, how come you're an ex-engineer? What happened?
Well, my story in engineering is not exactly a long one, but has a little subtlety. I started out as an engineer because I had gotten a degree in mechanical engineering out of college. But one thing I found for myself was that I had difficulty with cubicle living after a certain point. Obviously, it's something that it's sort of like chronic exposure. I mean, it's okay to do for a couple of years, but at the time that I had left, I just realized in my life I needed a break before I decided to go back to it.
Right.
So kind of my career track had been that the first about 4 or 5 years I spent as an engineer doing product development for a small company. And then I eventually transitioned to more of like something I wanted to do, a customer-focused like sales engineer role where it was a little more hands-on. I could parlay the stuff I appreciated about being able to interact with people and work on a team, but not basically be tethered to a desk so much.
Gotcha.
Long story short, a hobby of mine is in real estate, specifically the business of ownership of real estate units, like as a business. And I don't know, probably early mid 2018, because of some corporate restructuring at the company I had worked with, it was just a very good opportunity for me to transition away from sort of technical sales into more consumer pseudo retail sales. And I became a real estate agent. And that's where I've been ever since. But honestly, I'm planning on going back into engineering because something that comes up whenever I talk to brokers who have been around for a long time about their feeling to the market in my current market right now is they say it feels a lot like 2004, 2005 did. And I'm just conscientious that, real estate is good now, but it won't be good forever. And also just personally, I went to this engineering school. I have all this technical knowledge that I'm not leveraging when helping people sign contracts and look at houses. You know what I mean?
Of course. No, I understand. So question is this: why do the brokers feel like it's circa 2008, 2004, 2005? What signals are they seeing that the rest of us aren't paying attention to?
Well, something that I've spoken with a lot of people extensively about has to do with both the money lending environment and its effect on just market inventory. Without compromising my OPSEC too much, I conduct real estate transactions in the greater Springfield, Massachusetts area. And the things about it is that it's relatively home dense. It's not heavily urbanized, so there aren't a lot of high rises. Instead, it's very flat, sort of like Los Angeles, where you'll get a higher density of houses that are, 2 or 3 stories, and that's how most of the real estate is spread.
Okay, I understand. Well,
historically, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Historically, real estate inventory in Springfield had usually been approximately 2 to 3 months worth of transactions, meaning that if somebody wanted to list a house, their expected time on the market for a fair price would be between, 60 to 90 days. Obviously, if the seller's motivated, it can happen faster. Obviously, if the seller wants a certain price, it might take longer, but generally 60 to 90 days. Recently, and this has been the case since around 2017 in my market, the amount of inventory is like way less. It's closer to maybe a month's worth at most. If someone lists something, it can be expected to be put under contract very, very quickly, or there is a bidding war in order to secure it, especially if it's a nicer single family property.
So it's a seller's market right now.
Basically, and let me tell you, have I sent out query letters to try and get people to sell their houses?
I see. So you're from what I gather from what you just stated was that people are now, because what I noticed in the last couple of cycles of this type of stuff is that you could spot a bubble when speculators get in on the game, right? So what happens is you could see that there are people who buy a house as an investment for themselves and whatever. That's cool. There are people who go to these various trade shows and they learn, buy it, flip it, and sell it type of thing. And then when there's a lot of those people, that's when you know something is off, right? There's a little bit of momentum that's off kilter, and that the people who are coming in are exactly doing it just for the sake of the money only. Of course, every business should be driven by the desire to turn a profit. But if that's your only desire, you will find yourself in a situation where you will be lucky for a short while, and then you'll assume you're good, and as a consequence, you'll end up burnt to a crisp. So I kind of see where you're adding those maths up.
It's definitely trending in that direction. Real estate, as the existence of real estate agents and brokers indicates, real estate has the problem of being opaque and sometimes inefficient. These assets are illiquid and they're all bespoke, which is they're not fungible. So unlike, say, equity ownership, there just isn't the same opportunity for quick sale or purchase of something. There's a substantial infrastructure legally required to buy or sell a piece of property. And so because of that, I don't have exactly advanced analytics as far as where people are, but to exactly what you're saying, having spoken with people who are interested in investment property ownership, or seeing the evidence of people trying to find equity flip positions, basically distressed properties at a discount to buy it in cash, and then to put some amount of money into rehabilitating the property, like give it a new roof, new siding, redo the kitchen, that sort of thing, to get a disproportionate added value from the sale, even after transactional costs. Right. It's getting high. Like my father, who also lives in the Springfield area, he's told me that for his house, he's gotten like 3 or 4 query letters soliciting his sale of his house in cash. The person on the other side thinking they can get a good price, and that's just within the past year. Wow. And the seminars that talk about real estate, you can make your first 100,000 or any number of these things. They're always around, but as you suspected and spoke to, they're becoming very popular again. Right. I even attended one just to see what people are pitching about what they think real estate is like, and the market for so-called hard money loans, which are similar to cash, but they're heavily collateralized on the equity that's presumptive on a transaction. If you're able to get a piece of property way under market price, that's the securitization for the loan comes from. A person might not need to put up that much cash if they find a really good deal, because other people who have a lot of cash are willing to spot them. Right.
Because they see the opportunity to quickly say, okay, look, worst case scenario, at least the thing you're buying at a distressed price is more valuable than the price you're willing to pay for it. So even if I come in on this with you, we'll be okay.
Right. And that kind of thing has just become very popular within the past 2 or 3 years.
Well, what's funny about that is it kind of speaks to the whole process of Bitcoin, because when that first paper came out by Satoshi, it was around 2008. I found out about it about 2009. A couple of friends, were working at a startup at the time, and we were looking at it and like, you know what? I have an idea. Let's just throw a little bit of cash in this and then forget it ever happened, right? If it goes somewhere, great. If it doesn't, who knows? And I kept my position in that. I mostly forgot about it for a while because I thought the idea was interesting, but it was such a complicated problem they're trying to address with don't get me wrong, it's an elegant solution to a rather nasty problem. But it's one of those things where I remember the quote I remembered from Steve Jobs when they asked him when he first introduced the computer to some people at a party. They said, "Hey, the people that, the older people that are using this stuff, they're not going to get used to this yet. And his answer was, that's true. We'll just have to wait for them to die off because the next generation will be born with this technology in their hands. So I always had this assumption, right? And my presumption on this particular front was that Bitcoin is cool. It's got some really unique properties. I don't understand it well enough to just totally grasp the complexity of how it's going to interact with the rest of the economy and the government, because it's trying to be a global currency. So, but what I do know is that it may, if it ends up surviving past this generation of people who are currently alive, it may actually catch fire. And when I say catch fire, I don't mean the speculative people who are, mortgaging their homes to borrow money to buy Bitcoin. Because what happened was about last year or the year before, I think it was around December, I remember I used to go into work and I had this friend who would always ask me about Bitcoin. And every time I gave him an answer, a few other guys in the corner were like, "Oh my God, please stop talking about Bitcoin." And I was like, "Okay, that's my finger on the pulse." But then what happened was, literally a month later, those two very guys came up to me and said, "Hey, we want to know about Bitcoin." And all of a sudden, a light went off in my head, and I said, "If these two guys want to get in, that means it's time for me to get out, right?"
Yes.
So it was a perfect signal for me. I mean, I missed a good chunk of the upswing. But more important than that is I completely got to avoid that whole downswing that came with it. And so I've noticed that the same pattern occurs, exactly what you're talking about too, right? Because this whole buying real estate thing, it's the people you worry about, that's when you know it's wrong, is when the people who shouldn't even be in that business start running toward it, right?
Right. And the overarching effect on that, in my opinion, kind of dominates how this effect has happened in real estate, or at least how it's materialized this time, has been acutely, even teenagers who lived through, the headlines of when Lehman Brothers collapsed and the economic recession, and who, maybe were in high school or in college when the U.S. economy was in the worst of it.
Right.
They are now seeing real estate valuations, not for the top end of the market where liquidity is very, very scarce, like the $5 million mansion that 50 Cent owns that he hasn't been able to move, but like just for common houses. You're seeing prices reach and start to exceed the peak prices in 2003 and 2004. So for teenagers who saw that happen and saw that it can come back, but more importantly, for people like my father who owned their home throughout this period of time, people are now becoming, I don't want to say predatory, but aware of the fact that, people who own houses who want to get out now have the opportunity to do so without having completely lost their shirt or being underwater. Like prices are now to the point where theoretically there is enough extra space for amateurs to get into it without having to pay too much downside if it doesn't work.
Right. No, it's funny whenever I see stuff like that, I always remember, and one of my favorite authors is Mark Twain, and one of the things he always says is that when you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect.
Right.
So in that regard, when we were first talking Bitcoin, I can honestly tell you the amount of people who would just say, "I don't know what you're talking about and I don't care," that was a good sign for me. And then when everybody started talking to me about it, that was a bad sign. And I witnessed during the last economic recession with regards to housing prices and whatnot, I had friends who were all of a sudden, we're in the real estate game. I'm like, no, you're not. That's so out of your lane. It's not even funny. But the thing is, they have this assumption that they bought one house for themselves, but now they know how buying houses and selling houses works. I said, your sample size for what you're talking about is way too small. The house you bought is the one you're going to live in. The deal you might have gotten was probably luck. If you're going to go out there and risk all that against a deal that you don't have any clue as to where the pitfalls are, you're going to lose your shirt, right?
Right.
It's always
the fact that it's all leverage. It's one thing for you to buy it in cash and like maybe you lose 20 grand because it doesn't sell for as much as you want, or you spend it all on the contractor. It's another thing for you to start with only 20 or 30 grand and then to incur negative equity because the deal went bad or the trade turned against you.
Yeah, no, it's true. It reminds me of margin calls on equity trades that people make, right? So the whole you know, amount you got to get to stay to buy in, and the amount you got to stay to avoid a margin call, the ratio requirements in terms of payments for that type of stuff is always fascinating. But I want to switch a direction of conversation to your story about the 2016 election. So what was your story about that? That sounds interesting.
Well, it had come. So funny enough, that had come at that general that effect of Donald Trump and his mysterious rise in the Republican candidacy and polling, and just it was seemingly opaque to all of the world how he was being so successful. And it just by coincidence happened at the same time that in my life personally, I had really started to feel the itch that I needed to take a break for, at least a little while from corporate life. It wouldn't be for a little while until I actually would, but the impulse was starting to strengthen. And funny enough, it actually coincided to around the time I had actually read Anti-Fragile. As an aside, when you mention about how you bought Bitcoin for the purpose that you found it interesting and you thought it solved the problem, like you intrinsically valued it beyond what its monetary value was at the time. It reminds me of something that Nassim says in Anti-Fragile, at least I think it's Anti-Fragile, that investments should be done for entertainment or for themselves, not on speculation, not for trying to make money.
Right.
Like if you actually believe in something, then invest in it. Otherwise, you shouldn't do that. You're risking too much. Anyway, with the 2016 election, and just with kind of the things that were affecting and developing my worldview at the time, I had been desperately trying to make sense of some way that Donald Trump was being so successful. Like what explains what it is that he's doing? Because I could watch clips on CNN. I could read the transcriptions of the things that he said. I could see people on Twitter and even in print in broadsheet journalism get upset. But none of that, even just reading it literally or trying to induce from that some pattern, to me, I was just unable to figure out like what it is he's doing. But one thing was certain, like it works. Like this doesn't happen by accident, is at least the inclination that I had that led me to pursue it. Eventually, make a long story short, I had discovered the blog of Scott Adams. If your listeners aren't familiar with Scott Adams and his relationship with the 2016 election, Scott Adams had extensively documented Donald Trump's campaign through what he calls, quote, the master persuasion filter, end quote. Basically, Adams was able to use his background doing some hypnosis, having been trained as a hypnotist and understanding the practical ways that a person's psyche can be subverted in a state of mind when they're open to suggestion. And he was able to identify maybe not necessarily named, but at least particular things within Trump's engineered and precise use of language, while appearing to be totally extemporaneous and messy. But within that was, as Adams mentioned, a precise use of language that was incredibly effective at maintaining a level of memorability in the minds of people who are open to hearing what he had to say, which in practice are people who are on the fence or who don't know exactly what to believe or who see a phenomenon that their peers are interested in and are willing to go along with it. And through Scott Adams and just seeing this effect like you describe, but sort of the opposite with your friends in Bitcoin, seeing this effect with some of my social group. I'm a Christian, Bible-believing Christian, and many of the friends I have in my church are one, sometimes two generations older than myself. And I found them very interesting in the context of that election cycle as like a canary almost. I mean, no offense to them, but they were able to show me like what the psyche of a bigger group of people was, at least as I understood it, and how I saw like it happen in real time that several of them were like, oh, well, I really like Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz believes in the Bible and he's a strong Christian and so forth. And another friend of mine, let's say this is August of 2015, they would say, oh, well, I really like Rand Paul because Rand Paul believes in limited government and all of this. And over the course of the culling of the potential candidates, and as the polls express themselves in practice with different states giving delegates to different candidates and Trump coming out the winner in most of them, I saw them all like kind of rewire the reasoning that they admitted to with like, oh, well, I liked Rand Paul at first, but Donald Trump is saying some of the things Rand Paul likes, and I also like what he says about the wall, and oh, I liked Ted Cruz at first, but Trump is saying many of the same things, and he's better at fighting back, or I think he'll be stronger on this, or whatever. And that general experience impressed on me, like, oh man, Scott Adams's perspective explains things, even if I don't exactly understand, how some of this stuff actually works, or if I'm not clever enough to actually engineer things as well as Trump can. It made it like make sense in a way that I was willing to follow. Right. And from that, the effect was so strong that I made this very principled decision to say like, oh, Trump is going to win, and to start telling people that. But around the time that this was happening, I had started following Nassim Taleb on Twitter, and it was when he was still drafting articles and sections from his forthcoming book at the time, Skin in the Game. Right. And something that reading those sections on me about the ethics of risk taking, it impressed on me was it's not enough for me to say I think Donald Trump is going to win. I need to actually bet money that Donald Trump is going to win.
Right. And did you?
I bet around $6,000.
Oh wow. Okay. And how was your return on that?
I netted around 24,000.
Well, there you go, my friend. Skin in the Game always pays off.
Well, I mean, it was an emotional roller coaster. October of 2016. Make no mistake.
Of course. No, of course. No. See, I'll share an interesting perspective on that front with you, right? So, Scott Adams' work, I'm very familiar with it as well. But there's this game we play. There's a couple of buddies of mine on Twitter. We find people who appear to be intellectuals, right? And they could say things that sound good. And so we follow them, and then we place bets. Like, okay, what are the odds that this person's actually an idiot, but they're also an intellectual, like the IYI, right? So we place these bets, and we just wait, because sometimes people can hide their idiot side for a very long time, but eventually it just collapses under the weight of its own assumptions because there's just too much there for them to hold. So the thing with Scott Adams is that his description of the process that you described is accurate, but here's where so that's the intellectual part. But I'll explain to you where the idiot part comes into it. So what Scott Adams does, if you pay very close attention to it, is that he never ever predicts what's going to happen. He post-rationalizes what already happened to fit his theory and his models. So I called him out on that. Yeah, and that's where the part of it is that he gets half the equation right, but the other half he just completely stumbles all over himself. And then he had this clash with Joe Norman about the GMOs and data science and all that stuff. I think it was related more to climate science, and right then and there, like as soon as he was out of his depth, he started to indulge in sarcasm. And I see the use for sarcasm when it's useful. Right? So when you're dealing with somebody who's trolling you, sarcasm has value. But when you're engaging with somebody who is a worthy person to have a worthy interlocutor, somebody you can have a conversation with, I always try to say, look, sarcasm isn't the answer here. This is one of those situations where a side conversation would be worth it. But
right. You have to assess the merits of the actual argument being presented.
Exactly. So the thing that I've been warning people about with regards to Scott Adams is that he is a fantastic storyteller of history, but he fails short when it comes to the other aspect of it, the epistemological humility of not being able to make predictions before the event actually occurs. That's where the trouble with him comes in. So there's value in listening.
I totally agree.
Right. So I follow along with him, and I'm like, okay, I see what he has to say, and I wait to hear his rationalizations. And of course, there's going to be some good answers to that. But I can honestly tell you the truth from watching how Trump became president. There was probably about 10% premeditated thought into how he engages with people. The rest of it is just his personality built up over time of doing what it is he's been doing for a long time. So that's what made him so unpredictable. Right? So a friend of ours, David Sirac, who and I have these conversations all the time.
Yeah, I met David at Ruri 8 in June of last year.
So you know David. So that's awesome. So we were discussing this whole issue about this concept that's interesting to watch collapse under the current social trends, is that this idea of decorum, right? So it's like, well, you have to speak a certain way, you have to say certain things, you have to follow certain guidelines, because what happens is decorum is a way to maintain organizational structure, right? So I'll give you a clear-cut example of that is that in 2008 when Hillary was running against Barack, and she was supposed to be the front runner, but he came out of nowhere and basically just sidelined everything to do with her particular approach. The DNC, as they put Debbie Wasserman Schultz as the chair of the DNC and all that stuff that happened, essentially it was a game. It said, okay, look, this round we'll step aside. You take the podium and you become the candidate. But next round, we're going to rearrange and reshuffle the deck as we see fit. And along the way, they kind of got caught with all that stuff going in the wrong direction for them. And what I always find funny with people who talk about this particular issue, and I have I live in Canada. We don't have a dog in this fight. But what I find interesting about that whole issue is that this whole, Russiagate collusion noise that gets generated around this conversation, and people are like, well, it's the Russians' fault. And I always say, okay, that's a very irresponsible statement to make. And I'll tell you why it's irresponsible to make. If the Russians did hack and expose all the internal communications that were going on, and they made stuff up, you could say, look, they hacked it, they made stuff up, and they persuaded a whole group of people to vote in the other direction. What they'll never account for is, look, they did hack our system. And I'll buy that argument. I'll say, okay, look, buy is a strong argument. Let me rephrase it. I will rent that argument for 15 minutes.
Yes, I like that. I'll rent that argument.
Yeah, right. So we'll play along. And say, okay, they got into your account and they started to notice the deep-rooted corruption and the lies and the manipulation that you guys engage in as a party. And that's what people didn't really like. It's not that, and none of you guys have, and I've been witnessing, I have friends who are strong on the left side of the political, structure, and friends who are on the right side. I'm more apolitical in that regard, in that I try to find the best solution to the context of the problem.
Right.
So I don't really care who wins, as long as the person who wins is, a rational human being with a decent sense of epistemic humility. But with the folks from 2016, and they're still hurt about it, is that there's no acknowledgement that, look, if we had done this the way we claim to be, which is the party of the people and the party of good and all that stuff, that even if they went through our systems and our emails and all our stuff, they shouldn't have found dirt at the level that made people really dislike us. But there's a visceral reaction that they discounted, which was that they just genuinely don't like the level of hypocrisy. Because you can claim, and you heard it all the time when George W. was running, or when McCain was running against Obama, or when Romney was running. If you listen to the mainstream conversations, and I don't mean this in the media, I'm just talking general people, there's always this association that the right is the party of the dumbasses, right? The rednecks.
Right. Like that they pander to the lowest common denominator, or that they're supported by bumpkins in the country, that kind of idea.
Exactly. Right. So they painted this whole picture, and then it surprised them utterly that that picture is completely inaccurate. So to a large extent, it's inaccurate by such a large margin that it literally gobsmacks these people when they start to realize it's like, hey, we completely missed the boat on this. But that's okay, because that's just the debt that they've incurred. The interest on that debt is that they've created such a position for themselves by painting that we are the standard bearers of truth and we're on the right side of history, and that whole vainglorious approach they've taken to present their case became completely unraveled when the internal document sort of leaked itself, and Bernie. Yeah. So that right there, that's the interest that they can't seem to really grasp on, because that damage to their brand is so big that it makes people think, you know what? Even if I don't like Trump, I really don't like you even more. And so,
Right.
Much
It's
yourself,
in effect like Nixon, where or just the broader effect. The cover-up is always worse than the crime. Like if the DNC had openly said, well, we like Bernie Sanders, but we implicitly made this promise to Hillary Clinton, so that's what we're going to support. People would not have the same cognitive dissonance that they do when confronted with the email hacking evidence that you're describing.
Yeah, and that's funny because that sort of it shows up everywhere, right? So it shows up in the corporations, much like you said, your disdain for being tethered to a cubicle. The reason why cubicles, and I found this because I work at a company where I'm fortunate enough that I'm not tethered to a cubicle, but the people around me tend to be. And I started to notice is that what makes people hate those jobs is the obligation of having to be there, which is part one. But part two is it's a matter of how you're supposed to behave, right? So truth is no longer a viable currency to exchange in that set of environments because the political gamesmanship that comes into play almost always overrides what the person's natural instincts are. Whereas in a smaller setting or a different kind of company where, the leadership or the, surrounding infrastructure is built on combative, reactionary, self-thinkers, it's a much more hostile environment. It's actually much more enjoyable. So you can actually tolerate that because when you're in a corporate environment and tethered to a desk where politics is the game, it's like you're being constantly marinated in this low-level radiation that sort of sucks the soul, right?
Oh gosh, yes, and if you're in an office of fluorescent lights, you're actually literally being marinated in a low-level radiation that sucks the life out of you.
Yeah, and so that aspect of your disdain for that whole approach and desire to change away from it, I totally understand that, right? But I like it because my perspective on that front has always been simple, which is that I tried my very best to be in a situation where I have managed to sort of extract myself away from the hierarchy of the company that I work with, right? So right. What it is I looked around and I said, okay, let me find a way to do something here that makes it so it's hard for them to kind of categorize me, and that gives me a level of freedom.
Oh, and honestly, it's what I had strived to do when I was at my most recent engineering/sales engineering position. Because I was in sales, as Nassim describes in Skin in the Game, sales or trading or individual profit centers are like the unicorn style employee, quote unquote, where he or she has the ability to kind of subvert the relationship between employer and employee because they become so valuable in and of themselves that you can't just, it's a risk to let them go. You cannot treat them with the same subjugation you can someone on a salary. And I found out the hard way what happens if you're too good at that, or if you don't play around politically well enough. Without giving up too many details, I had been able to on a cursory way secure and almost directly secure 2 different accounts that were worth each at least, let's call it $800,000 per year worth of business, for a company that itself grossed between $10 to $12 million a year. And I brought both of these accounts to my immediate supervisor and his boss, the general manager of that division of the company. And at both levels, I encountered resistance. And on one hand, I'm thinking, like, the CEO came in here, 3 months ago saying you guys need to be searching for these kinds of accounts. Why are you guys giving me all this what for doing my job? Well, it turns out, and this is part of why I chose to leave, there was the political obfuscation that they were kind of keeping me separate from their bosses and their upper echelon, because if I were to bring those accounts, it, one, creates more work for them and that local organization, but 2, they recognize that it would create this expectation to get more accounts like that they just couldn't deliver.
Right.
And me being me, I'm like, well, I did my job, and one, I'm not getting my commissions from these accounts, and two, how am I supposed to get more like this if you won't even get the ones that I have? I became
Right.
very, very frustrated with like that environment.
Right.
And obviously I'm not trying to induce from that every company is like that, but
No, of
I'm
course.
just saying my experience is exactly like you're describing. You sound like you're eminently more successful at me in negotiating that than I was, at least in that company. But I totally agree with you. That is the type of employment a person should strive for if you have to be employed by someone else.
Yeah, and just so that our listeners don't get a false perception that I'm somehow a high IQ person, to
Yeah,
an inside joke. What it was actually mostly luck. I'm smart enough to
exactly.
recognize when I'm lucky and when I'm not. So the way I deal with it is I put the maximum effort I can into whatever it is I do, and sometimes that just turns into lucky opportunities. So I'll give you a clear example. So when I first started at the current company I work for, I worked in the call center, just taking calls to help customers troubleshoot devices that they had purchased with us. And so I knew what my salary was per year. It was a meager starting salary that it was basically barely sometimes even making it paycheck to paycheck, right? So, but it was a job. So I was like, okay, there's dignity
Yeah,
in being here and all that. So what ended up happening was I remembered my first lucky opportunity came about when this customer had just called us and they had essentially switched their business from a separate telecom carrier to us, and they had brought their entire business over because I guess they were so poorly mistreated that the person in charge of their IT decided, you know what, I'm just taking the business and going elsewhere. So they had come to us, and as soon as they had come on to switch over to our carrier, what happened was the sale was made on a Thursday, and the switchover was scheduled for a Friday, but the Friday was a holiday, and then the switchover got delayed, and all of a sudden the entire company didn't have a cell phone service for the whole weekend. So,
I
so
shouldn't laugh, but like that's a real thing.
that's a real thing, and it was a large company, it was a large account, and so this person called in, and this was completely. First of all, it wasn't even in my domain, right? It's like, okay, you have an account-related problem. I am a technical support specialist. Let me help you with the best I can. So I said, look, I'll tell you what, just stay on the line. Let me go find people. So I ended up putting them on hold, getting my boss's boss on the line, calling various departments, getting like 7 people on the line. And
Wow.
all of us worked together to transition to help this account be salvaged, because what was happening was I looked at the math, because
Awesome.
what I used to do, yeah, and it was because before I used to run a business. So what I used to do, whenever a customer called in, I always first pull up their account. I'm like, how much is this person worth to this company, right? And that's not like something I used to discriminate with. That's something I used to say, okay, let me use a specific kind of judgment with this customer. So this customer is bringing in roughly, I'd say at that time I did the math in my head. It was about 25 times my salary per year was being brought in by this company, right? So I said, okay, if I salvage this, I could essentially retire from this job for the next 25 years, and I still cover myself because look at what I brought in for them. So I managed to salvage it, and long story short, my boss was extremely ecstatic about it, and emails get sent out, and I'm one of those people. I'm like, please don't mention me in an email, just let me do my job. And from that opportunity came another chance, which was, hey, we have this sort of website we want to build. We're not really sure. Do you know anything about that type of stuff? And I was like, well, finally, right? So that's where I got.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm actually a aspiring software engineer, because the company I first used to run, I hired software engineers and I was taken to the cleaners by them. And so I learned my lesson to say, hey, you know what? If there's a job, if there's a job that you can't do yourself, never pay somebody else to do it for you, because if they know that you don't know what you're doing and they don't
Then
have
you're
the
captive.
scruples, of course, all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm hostage. I'm the CEO and I'm hostage of this company that I'm running. And a day dawned on me. I said, they're not that much smarter than I am. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I can at least piece together a few things here and there. So I decided to teach myself. And lo and
Right. If
behold,
I'm going to have to
leverage
do
that.
this, I'm gonna do it on my own terms instead of being bullied.
Exactly. So that was the experience I've had, and this has been my only corporate job I've ever had. Before this, I worked in the fitness industry on straight commission. I used to, when I started out, and I always tell people this, and like, the young people who sometimes I talk to and I mentor and whatnot, I always tell them, like, you have to take one job in your life where you get paid on straight commission, because that will teach you
Yes.
so much about what your skill, even if you suck at it, it doesn't matter. go in.
Oh, especially if you suck at it. Like
Yeah,
you learn how food tastes when you fast. Okay.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's the primary source of all this. And I used to tell them, like, when I first start at any gym, the conversations are always simple. So I'll give you a funny anecdote. I was working at this terrible fitness club, and I wanted to go to another one where my friend was working at. And so he brought me in, and this club was just starting to get, they were about to, like, a week and a half away from opening. So I went in, I introduced myself to the owners. They had seen my resume, and they're like, right now we're not hiring anybody, but thank you, we'll keep your resume on file. I said, okay, no problem. So we're chit-chatting for about 5 minutes, and me and the owner, we discussed views, and he's like, oh, well, we got to figure out how we're going to do the sales and whatnot. I said, oh, so you're going to set up a quota based on your expenses of the company plus 15% margin to give you a little bit of cushion so that you can extend your business going forward. And they both just looked at me like, what? What did you just say? Right? It was kind of like this moment of like, but that's how you set commissions for the sales team. You tell them, I need you to hit 50,000 this month. If you don't hit that 50,000, your quota is not met, your bonuses are not met, all that stuff. But they don't pull that number out of their butts. They pull that number out of the expenses that they have to manage.
It comes from reality. It comes from P&L.
Exactly. So he looked at me and he didn't say anything. So he's like, my buddy's like, let me give you a tour. As I'm finishing up my tour, the owner comes over to me and goes, how would you like to be my sales manager? So I stared at him. I said, I thought you weren't hiring anybody. He goes, we weren't hiring anybody, but I think I would like to hire you. I said, all right, I'll work for you, but on one condition. He goes, okay, what's the condition? I said, what do you pay for your commission rates? And he said, we pay 7% per sale. I said, okay. And he goes, I'm going to give you a salary. I said, take my salary off the table and just increase my commission by 5%. Because I'll eat right? Because if I kill it, I'll eat it. You don't have to pay me because if I'm here and nothing's happening, you're not losing any money. But if I bring you sales, then you owe me my money. But I've earned that money, so it's fair for both of us. So he looked at me and he goes, okay. We shook on it. For the first 2 weeks, I barely got any sales because all I was doing was walking around, talking to people, pounding the pavement, going to the grocery store where people would be around that area, watering holes and whatnot. After a while,
buying cheap options, as Nassim would say.
Exactly. But those 2 weeks are grind, right? You're literally, as you said, you're fasting.
That's the first 6 months of being a real estate agent. Like, nobody knows who you are. How does anybody know to trust you? Nobody knows what you look like because you don't have any signs. You have to hand out business cards like you're allergic to them. Like, I totally understand.
Yeah. And that process alone is what a lot of these kids are not really being taught how to do this, right? So the whole idea that to make a sale, you have to be good at what you do. And what I mean by that is you have to understand how to pitch value to another person. So I'll give you another clear-cut example of that. This conversation right now that you and I are having, you don't know me. All you've known is how we tweet. And that Twitter conversation between me, Amber, and the guys. Yeah. And it's always like, okay, look, it took years of building those relationships to the point where the first podcast was literally released yesterday. And before that, everybody...
I haven't listened to all of you and Joe talking, but so far, like as I was listening to it on the car down going to church and back, I just like you described in your tweet, like you're thinking of ideas having re-listened to it. That's the same. I had the same experience.
Yeah, and that's all credit goes there to Joe, but because that's the kind of mind that you're dealing with when you talk to Joe. But what made it interesting was this whole idea of my first, and I started this podcast very, very simply, right? The assumption has always been that nobody talks about the stuff I like, right? Nobody talks about risk. Nobody talks about ruin. Nobody talks about complexity. Nobody talks about interdependent layers of different systems that are always brought into consideration. But I said, well, why don't I just start it? So I sent out a tweet to the guys. Everybody's like, yeah, that's a good idea, da, da, da. And I'm like, okay, so it's a great idea, but who's going to execute, right? Nobody wanted to execute.
Yeah. Well, it's much like when you learned about outside hiring. If you don't do it or aren't willing to do it, you can't expect anyone else to,
Exactly, yeah. And that's the funniest part of it all, because it loops all right on itself. Because I told the guys, and I knew, because I'm like, you know what? This first podcast that we published was such a pain because I didn't know how podcasting is hosted. I didn't know all these things you have to go through, the legal requirements for getting the tracks and all this other stuff that went through it. But now that it's all done, it turns into a sort of like a template that you can actually just easily publish going forward. But that first
Yeah,
one, man.
the biggest transactional cost or overhead is already done. Like if you do it with one,
Yep.
you can do it for 50 or 100 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So it all ties back into that same concept of convexity, right? So me and Ember, she so for most people who don't know, Ember is an intricate part of this. Even though I'm the loud mouth who talks all the time, she actually does a lot of the detailed oriented stuff in the back. So usually when we have a
Hi,
guest
Amber.
on,
Yep, I'm still here.
her natural predisposition is to be quiet, right? So I have to always sort of push her to say something. But what she actually does for us is that she'll go and do research. I'm like, okay, this person's coming on in this area of expertise. So for you, this is a perfect transition because we're going to talk about the biohacking that you're interested in, and we're going to talk about cell towers. So I'll give you the floor on that front, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. My interest in biohacking actually came of all places related to my other kind of pet interest in movies. I think I mentioned in my biography to you, but also you mentioned in the announcement tweet. I really love the pictures in movies, and specifically, I saw the movie Limitless around 2012. Yeah, around 2012. And for those unfamiliar, Limitless is about a man who is, by his own admission, like a loser. He's a writer, so it's redundant. But I'm kidding. But he makes he meets an old friend, and this friend of his gives him this drug called NZT that is this like super cognitive enhancer, and in practice it makes him incredibly smart and very clever. And things in the movie that depict this are how he's able to learn and become fluent in French in a couple of days, and he learns and sees patterns in the market and makes himself a lot of money, and all sorts of other stuff. And as a movie, it's very entertaining. I think it's structured well and paced well in order to incorporate dramatic elements to a point where it moves very, very easily. But anyway, when I saw the movie, I was so impressed with it and thought specifically that, oh, this has got to be based on a real thing. Like, what's the real life NZT? And I had done some Google research and looked at other people who, even long before the movie, had studied cognitive enhancers. And funny enough, many of them used their performance before and after on IQ tests as evidence that a particular cognitive enhancer works. But the short version is I was able to find a source that led to other places that indicate that the effects of this mythical compound NZT are very similar to ones produced by a compound called modafinil, that is an anti-narcolepsy drug. Its trade name in the United States is Provigil. And so naturally, when I found out, oh, modafinil can do this, I'm like, well, I'd like to get my hands on some. But unfortunately, it's a prescription drug, so I had to order it from India. But
of course,
once I got my hands on it and I took some, like, it was incredible. I could zone in for 12 or 14 hours in a whole day. I could retain a level of focus that I couldn't even using substances like caffeine or a nicotine patch for much longer periods of time. And I could even go to sleep with it, and it wouldn't affect my ability to go to sleep or wake up at appropriate times and so forth. And I thought it was great. And I found out about this compound modafinil from a man named Dave Asprey.
Yes, the coffee guy.
Exactly, the bulletproof coffee guy. Having found out modafinil was successful for me personally at that time, circa 2012, 2013. It to me lent credibility to this guy, and I'm like, okay, I will give more seriousness to what he has to say. And he was the first person to expose me to the word biohack, which is just broadly the willingness for a person to subject themselves to experimentation to see what different compounds or different regimens or whatever does to them, specifically in pursuit of the improvement of performance, which is what Asprey was interested in, though he's since become much more interested in selling supplements. But
Right.
it generally the philosophy was just the willingness to take your own risks, to see what something does, and then to keep what's good.
Mm.
Long before I had ever encountered the idea of optionality and read anything by Nassim Taleb, I had like practiced or learned the methodology in doing this, and I'd also learned that there are certain biohacks that can be lethal to a person. An example would be that certain people who combine certain compounds together, like if they take caffeine and another one called yohimbine, one of them acutely increases your blood pressure, and another one it decreases your body's ability to reduce its blood pressure by capillary absorption. I can't remember specifically what it is, but something I'll say right now that we can talk about later is that it doesn't really matter, because I think that explanations generally are just bullshit. But sorry, I am a Christian and I try not to swear, but there are times when it's appropriate. Anyway, but point being that like certain biohacks can be fatal, and I realized even before hearing the phrase precautionary principle or absorbing barrier, I was like, well, there's no way I'm ever going to do that. Even if I turn out okay, I don't want to die, you know? It's not worth the risk, that sort of thing.
That's a good attitude to have.
Right. To live to fight another day, you have to start by living. So anyway, to condense a very long story, Dave Asprey had done a co-authorship, or rather kind of co-linkage, with a neurosurgeon, a man named Dr. Jack Cruz. He practices out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and it was he and Asprey had done this series on what's called cold thermogenesis, which is just about how the brown fat, but really every cell with mitochondria, has the ability to generate heat in response to a cold stressor. And there's ancestral gene expression in addition to acute ones. So like someone who is black or brown is going to have a smaller gene expression of what's called uncoupling proteins that allow them to generate heat in their mitochondria, heat and infrared light, than someone who is pasty white, like from Ireland or from Northern Europe, for example.
Okay.
But anyway, that was my first experience to that guy named Jack Cruz. And Jack, I had tried to read his blog series on cold thermogenesis when I became interested in it from Asprey's article, and Jack went into further detail, and I found kind of the material very difficult to read, and he provided references that themselves were they were both somewhat scattered and required effort to put together. But it led me down a path of other biohacks that I hadn't encountered. For example, the idea of putting orange-colored glasses on at night, specifically as a deterrent to the effects of artificial light relative to what the spectra of light that the human eye would encounter at nighttime, naturally. So, if you're to go 10,000 years ago in the past, the only light there was at nighttime would have been fire, candlelight, or its equivalent, in addition to starlight. Whereas now we have the ability to generate light that's just artificial at will. But it goes along with several things I learned from Jack that were above and in some ways overruled what I had learned about biohacking from Dave Asprey.
Right.
And the big takeaway I learned from Jack and the resources that just body of thought led me to, specifically a book by Gerald Pollack called The Fourth Phase of Water, in which water in the presence of a hydrophilic surface actually arranges itself into sheets because the molecules form a hexagonal pattern whose density gets changed according to the photons of light that interact with it. Another book called The Body Electric by Robert O. Becker that describes in detail the electromagnetic effects that happen within the body, not just of humans, but other mammals, even of plants, and documents some of the results of electromagnetic experiments that primarily were conducted by the Russians prior to the 1950s and 60s. But there were just a handful of resources I discovered, and the conclusion to all of this was that on a heuristic level, there's all sorts of stuff to do about it. That's what I was really interested in.
Right.
One of the things that that Jack and other people like him say is, eat a lot of fish, because the active omega-3 in mammals is DHA. It's not EPA, it's DHA. And DHA gets acutely destroyed around blue light, which is light between, say, 440 to maybe 400 nanometers in wavelength, especially in like your eyes and your optic nerve, and from like Wi-Fi or cell signals or other quote unquote non-native EMFs. And yeah, when I first read that, I thought, okay, all right, sure, whatever. What do I need to do? And the heuristic given to me was, all right, well, eat some lox, salmon as often as you can, eat a bunch of oysters, eat shrimp, et cetera, et cetera. And I had done that as a biohack, thinking, oh, I can eat sushi every meal, that's fine. And something that I had found that I thought was totally unintuitive was my vision. I'm nearsighted, like 1.6 diopters thereabouts, but and I have prescription eyeglasses. But I had discovered that that if I were to eat a lot of fish, like a lot of fish, like I was eating it every single meal, a lot of fish or shellfish every single meal for like 2 or 3 weeks, my vision actually improved. Now I thought this was good until I cycled it. Like it's one thing to think, oh, this is actually working, but you have to actually test it. You have to see if it's real. Like if you don't do an A and B, how do you even know? Because it could just be the placebo effect.
Of course.
Anyway, I did test it and it was real. And the tragic thing is that I have to eat these terrible, slimy things called oysters as often as I possibly can for the rest of my life. And I hate them, but I love them because every time I eat a bunch of oysters and do cold thermogenesis, like I sleep like a rock and I dream really vividly. Anyway, it led to that body of thought just came from learning a few of these resources and understanding how there is a construction of modern life that exists today that is fundamentally different than the let's call it evolutionary history of humans that's millions, maybe billions of years old, depending on how far back you want to examine organisms. And that, while humans are resilient to certain chronic stressors that exist in modern life, like fluorescent light or, like cell phones, that doesn't necessarily make them safe or even good. And where this dovetails with the philosophy of risk-taking beyond just the willingness to actually test things and apply risk with skin in the game, is the idea that I've become incredibly intransigent towards, is that people underestimate the dangers that accompany things like on their weakest effects, like fluoridated water, or then getting more strong, like artificial light, to their strongest effects, such as like the newest generation of cell towers, 5G cell towers, whose frequencies and power transmission are like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude higher than any that have ever been used in a consumer application before. That, I'm not trying to say immediately, oh, I'm prognosticating and I know 100% that they're going to be bad, but that in a voice that, in a set of voices rather, that feel even more quietly observed than Joe Norman and Nassim Taleb with glyphosate or GMOs, or even the bigger precautionary principle paper that describes with mathematical rigor what's incumbent on avoiding systemic effect risk. That people are saying the same thing about non-native EMFs. I'm again, like I said, I'm not trying to say that new cell towers are going to be bad, but that there have been few examples of a larger audience being willing to believe that they're possibly risky is what to me is concerning, because you're now creating this top level adoption, which, if it is catastrophic, will suddenly affect a huge amount of people. Like, if 10% of the people in New York City got some sort of mysterious metabolic illness because of the cell towers there, that's almost 1 million people. Like, that would be a tragedy. But anyway, that's the general summary of kind of what you'd mentioned about what got me into biohacking and what some of my opinions are about how it relates to risk and precaution.
So, what were the costs of your experiment?
So which one? Because I've done plenty.
Your most vivid ones.
So generally, I would only do something if the cost was actually reasonable. And reasonable is a subjective term, but for me it was, say $50 to $100 or less, depending upon what it actually was. So for example, in the case of getting modafinil that was generic, it maybe cost me $70 or $80 to get a small test amount to get it shipped and then to try it. In the case of oyster, I'm sorry.
The cost I was focusing on wasn't necessarily the monetary cost. I was saying, like, what did you notice? Because you did get the benefits of better eyesight, but did that come at a cost of, like, I don't know, reduced hearing or something of the sort? So because as these things work with, there's always a trade-off that you gain one thing, but nature asks for payment in another spot, right?
Absolutely. One of the costs that I've noticed is now I have to eat oysters whenever I can, and I don't like that.
So you didn't have any negative. You didn't have any adverse, besides the taste factor. You didn't have any adverse reactions to any of the stuff that you're doing to your body.
Well, certain things I did, and as I sense that's where you're going, I can talk a little bit more about that. For modafinil, for example, I noticed that if I overdosed on it, while the mean lethal dose is very, very high, like I don't think it's even established in humans, but it's far more than what would be considered a therapeutic dose. If I took more than what I had approximated work for me, I would find that I would get some slight tachycardia, like my heart would race slightly, and I would have the ability to focus, but it would be impaired by occasional racing thoughts. Other costs, for example, might be anybody who knows me understands that when it gets dark or if I'm around a lot of artificial light during the day, I wear a special set of orange tinted glasses, as I mentioned, specifically to eliminate certain photons of light of a given frequency from interacting with my corneas and my irises. And obviously, like, if you're the only one in the room wearing stupid orange glasses, you look like a Bono who's just not so cool. Something in general that I have observed is the more technical and modern a biohack, like if you're using special LED lasers on your brain, or if you're using some special meter that you track your blood pressure patterns as you're sleeping to see your sleep quality, or if you're even going to the doctor to get blood work drawn frequently, as simple as that. The more modern and specific the biohacks are, the more likely you are to encounter a really pensive downside. When I was learning about the effects of non-native EMFs, I had a sleep tracker on my phone that I actually kept under my pillow, which I would now slap the younger version of myself for ever doing, because I'm introducing some thing that radiates electromagnetic fields that aren't from nature next to my organ that has the biggest electromagnetic field permeability of my brain. Anyway, I had tried to use my phone to kind of measure, quote unquote, how well I was sleeping, and something I just noticed at the time was like, my sleep is terrible, and I didn't understand why. And then as I kind of learned, I was like, oh well, I should stop doing this. I should put my phone in airplane mode when I'm sleeping, instead of like trying to do some abstract measurement to chase some tiny improvement in the quality of life. And then I learned that, well, my sleeping got better. But to answer the spirit of kind of Ember's broader question, ultimately, in doing more of the quote unquote natural or primal style biohacks, like cold exposure, like eating a lot of fish and oysters, like wearing the orange colored glasses, and or being around actual fire. As I incorporated more of that, I found that my need to use, say, supplements to enhance my quality of life, or to go out of my way, or like use other compounds to see if they had a beneficial effect, they slowly went away. There was a time in, I think it was like 2015, when I still had some modafinil around, but I hadn't taken it in quite some time because I didn't want to conflate effects of biohacks. And it was long after I had adopted the heavily circadian rhythm driven sunshine and fire style life that I had taken some modafinil, and I found that it didn't do anything. Like there was no benefit of focus, that I wasn't any more able to pick my spots and be more engaged than I was just normally. And it kind of just dawned on me, like, sort of like a Twitter follow who we both keep up with, a guy named Guru Anaerobic. Sort of like he says, nature builds in a lot of stuff that's good. We're the ones who screwed up.
Right. No, so on that front, like, so I was similarly interested in this, but I always had a different approach to it, because when I got started in the weightlifting arena, one of the first couple of guys I met, one guy was Russian and one guy was German, right? And they were older guys, so they were, from like the communist era, and they kind of had experience training athletes, and they were always looking for an edge on competition. And one of them actually took, to lack a better phrase for it, a pity on a 16-year-old kid. And I said, you know what? I see you coming in here to this gym, and it was this little ratty gym that I used to work out of. And he goes, you're putting in effort, but you're not getting any results. I said, yeah, it's because I don't know what I'm doing, right? That's just the fact of life.
I appreciate his admitting.
Yeah. It's like there's nothing here that is natural. All these movements it is what it is. So whatever. So the guy told me, he goes, okay, I'm just gonna teach you a couple of things, and I'm gonna tell you what never to do, and then the rest is up to you. I said, okay. And so the trick was, he said, look, fast whenever you can. Like, okay. And I grew up in a Muslim household, so for me, fasting was a horrible experience because you don't drink water and all the other stuff that goes with it. But this is not what he was talking about. And he said that lift very heavy weights when you don't feel good. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, whenever you feel really down, like let's say you go through a state where you're, low on energy or anxious or whatever the case may be, just come and lift very, very heavy weights. Whatever you can, pick any exercise you like and just pick something really heavy up. That's it. And he goes, the rest of it, he goes, you'll figure it out. And so I always kept those two ideas in mind, because it didn't click perfectly in for me until Nassim was explaining the concept of a fat tail. And for those of you who are listening to us who've never heard of this concept, well, essentially think of it in the best way is that the number of people you'll meet who are on average between the ages of 0 and 100 years of age, that's a bell curve, right? Someone's going to fall somewhere in the middle. Nobody's going to be 1,000 years old. But if you think about, who's going to be, net worth financially at $100 billion or net worth financially at minus $50 million, that's a bigger grasp, right? That's a huge range. Yeah. That's where the Fattel variable comes into play. So how that applies in this case,
change the properties of the observed quantity.
Exactly. So the way that applies in the weight training example is that your the heart rate and the variance of your biochemistry, because your system doesn't communicate with you in any way other than stressors and hormones, right? It doesn't react to your mental. People who go on these trips about, oh, I'm going to do yoga and I'm going to read these books about this, that, and the other. I'm like, okay, look, that's cool, but that's just surface level stuff. You want a chemical reaction, and you want that to emanate from the bones, and that can only happen when you pick up something very, very heavy. And very, very heavy is obviously a relative term. Very heavy can mean the following, right? So if you, and I when I train clients and when I do this stuff now, I always tell people, I'm like, okay, just map out a week for yourself. How many things are you picking up, and how much is the average weigh, right? So, I pick up my backpack. It weighs about 5 pounds. Cool. I pick up my son. He weighs, 9 pounds. Cool. Okay. And then what about the rest of the time? Well, I sit at the office. I drive. I do this. So great. So your actual load that you're putting on your system from a stress point of view is nothing. Essentially, that's what it is.
Yeah. It's very, very little.
It's very, very little. I said, so now that's fantastic. But also look at that against, so map that load against the structure of your body against time and space. It's spread out, and there's no acute sources of fight or flight induced from your system. At the same time, you are, as we said previously, marinating in this low-level radiation that is your corporate life that you don't like, which is leading you to go home, watch Netflix, eat garbage, consume noise via Instagram, whatever it is you're doing. And then because you're trying to snap out of it, you look for the easier solution, which tends to be, oh, let me find a book by some guy. I'm like, oh, that's great. Here's what you should actually do. Go to the gym and just pick up something heavy. And if you're good at this, pick up something that weighs twice as much as you do. Right? So squat or deadlift or bench press twice your body weight. And what's going to happen in that instance is that your body, as relaxed as it was, as stressed as it may have been because of the radiation of the environment of work, and I use that term very specifically, so don't, we're going to talk about that after, but what ends up happening is your bones react, and you get a visceral immune response, so to speak, because your bones really are where your immune system starts to actually work itself out, right? So you get this reaction in the gym, and you pick up something very heavy, and all of a sudden, your mind, your thought process, everything stops, and you're focused exactly where you want to be. So when you're picking up weights, you get out of your head, and that's why he was saying that if you're feeling down, go pick up something heavy, because during that moment of picking something heavy, the chemical reactions that are going on in your brain, the chemical reactions that are going on in your body, all of that stuff, the junk that was there gets filtered away. Now, of course, this is not a be-all, end-all solution to everybody who's got all these mental health issues, but it's enough of a solution that the vast majority of the people who are suffering from these particular ailments of the modern day can receive a tremendous amount of benefit for. And so go into the gym, pick up something heavy, and then you get a fat tail event introduced into your life, because for the week you're picking up your child or your backpack, that's one thing. And then for one brief moment during your week, you're picking up something so heavy that your entire body has to recalibrate itself to stay in the zone. Right now, if you get really good at this, you could do something extraordinary, which is to say, okay, your goal at the gym is always the same thing. And I always tell people this. The goal at the gym is twofold. One, make sure you could lift when you're 100, right? Because that's the first thing. That's that whole rule of if you don't survive, it doesn't matter. So if you can't pick up weights at 90 or 100, you've lost. Once that goal has been embedded into your mindset, your second goal is simple: become as strong as you possibly can, and that could be at any weight that your body naturally gravitates toward. Don't force yourself to overeat because you're a skinny little guy trying to get big, and don't try to starve yourself to become skinny if you're a bigger person. It is what it is. Just live within the frame of reference that you've been given, and maximize that. And that's the best biohack in that regard. And what that does for you is it will recalibrate your ability to sleep well. It will recalibrate your mood, which will open up optionality for you, right? So I went down the path you're going, but I remembered it from their point of view, which was to just stick to stuff that anybody could do, stuff that allows you to proceed down a path that's replicable for anybody else. So it's not BS related, right? Because I was interested in the butter coffee and whatnot, and I started to listen to it, and I was like, this is such a marketing pitch that it's almost losing its value. Like every second I hear this, it makes me more and more reluctant to listen to this person, right? So
yeah,
on that biohack field,
I totally
right? So we're on
I mean,
agreement on that front.
Yeah, I had actually, I actually like the flavor of coffee and liked what butter coffee did, and there are a handful of people who do as well, and it just kind of indoctrinates them. They think that everything this guy says is right, and I learned to develop my own skepticism after having tried enough things that specifically Dave Asprey said to do that didn't work, but
right.
It was a teaching experience that I'd already learned from just a handful of other things in life where there is domain dependence. A person may be right in one area, but that doesn't make them right in all of them.
Exactly. And that's what, a lot of the latest thing that was going on Twitter just now was the whole idea of the best war to engage in is the war against BS, right? So if you can eliminate BS from from the vast majority of people's lives, you can reduce a whole lot of unnecessary self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the foot, right? A lot of people just shoot themselves in the foot because they're constantly engaging in things that create inflammation. And I've always found this interesting because I have a couple of friends who are doctors, and what they tell you is that disease is almost just basically inflammation. It's inflammation to the point where your body can't handle it, right? So you need external resources to sort of manage that. Medication is an attempt at solving that particular layer of problems. But essentially, when something is wrong with your system, it's because there's chemicals that are being generated in that area that are not leaving, right? It's like you have a squatter, and the squatter also refuses to bathe and is prickly and is trying to take over other organs and all this other stuff that starts to happen. And it's essentially a consequence of accumulated inflammation. Sometimes it just happens because, we don't understand the full reasons for it. But the vast majority of time, if you are engaged in activities that induce chronic inflammation, you will start to notice your mood being affected negatively. And there's 3 or 4 things that people could do that is very simple. And the reason you know that this is true is because it's not special, right? So the first thing
exactly.
Yeah. First thing you can do is just stop consuming and start producing. Right? Go do something, anything, right? Because if the vast majority of people are constantly consuming on their cell phone or watching TV or whatever it is they're doing. Okay, stop that for a while and just go produce something. Like fix your garden, right? Clean up your house, or go help build one of those Habitat for Humanity type projects.
Open a Word document and just start writing a journal of what happened today. Yeah. Like do anything else.
Exactly. So that you're no longer in the process of consuming, but you're now in the process of producing. So that's the easy part to do. Second part is get some damn sleep, right? Easy life hack. More sleep equals odds in your favor. And the third thing is just stop eating. For a while when you're because the friend of mine who I spoke with, who we're hoping to bring on as a guest eventually, his take was that from when you put food in your mouth to when it exits your body, it takes roughly 18 hours. Right? So that's when your system is good. So what's happening is when you eat food and you start this process, you have 18 hours to let the body literally complete the journey from start to finish. What people do is because they've been chronically consuming so much junk that they have new biome and bacteria in their gut that's constantly, starving for sugar, asking them to consistently add more junk into the food, into the system. So that's why they get hungry every 3-4 hours. And as a consequence, the amount of byproduct of the bacteria that consumes that sugar is more inflammation into the gut, right? And that inflammation starts to spread to the rest of the body. And that inflammation actually reacts to the way your mood is perceived.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just the interactions of gut. It's that there's a nerve, I believe it's called the vagus nerve, that actually links the gut to the hormonal circadian rhythms in your brain. Like if you are eating bad food or if your circadian rhythms are bad or vice versa, you can make one worse by doing the other. So like if you're eating like the best food possible, but you're staying up late at night and not getting enough sleep, your health will be worse and your ability to digest or other things will be bad as well. similarly, like if you're getting good circadian rhythms, but like you're eating, Cheetos and candy bears, like you can also expect yourself to not be working optimally. Like there's a relationship between, I think, the vagus nerve and the leptin hormone and light cycles. But yeah, I'm not to cut you off. It was more just to build on what you're saying. Like there's the human, as Joe Norman described, is a full ecosystem, and any interruption within what is, any one of the calibrations that it possesses affects the whole thing.
Of course. And what makes all this utterly fascinating is that the disruptions that come from not having a sound control over your own body, i.e., you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not lifting heavy weights and whatnot, opens you to external stresses that come your way when you interact with people outside of your circle, right? So people who are negative towards you, who are, for lack of a better word, bullies, or just pure ignorant types who manifest themselves in your life, either personally, socially, or through your professional interactions, that is a compounding factor against the debt of your own personal problems that you've accumulated, right? So I've always told some of the people that I work with, I'm like, if you're unhappy with A, B, and C, start with A, which you control, which is start with your own body, right? Like,
exactly.
I can't go to the gym. I'm this, that, and okay, no problem. Here's what you can do. Just
right.
do 100%.
There's a phrase among chess players: a bad move only leads to other bad moves.
Right. If you sacrifice your health at home, you're not going to have much chances outside. But so this biohack on that front is something where I think people are so heavily swamped with noise, because if you really pay attention to how many advertisements you see per day, and that includes your phone, the TV, the billboards that you drive past, and the conversations on radio and whatnot, it's 90% food, right? It's always food.
Yeah.
And the other 10% is almost always this new drug. Ask your doctor if this will help you fix your whatever. Meanwhile,
drugs are entertainment, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, you're creating problems, and then you're solving these problems with medication, which is fine when it's necessary. Like, this should be the last resort. It's kind of like going to war. It should be the last thing you do. But the first thing is, how about we don't artificially induce unnecessary inflammation to the body? Right?
I totally agree. I will remark, though, that in my experience, in just kind of relating the stuff that I do, which I admit is extreme, even among people who take pride in doing this, that I've encountered very, very many people who, even when presented with the right way to go, or okay, let me rescind that and say not necessarily the right way to go, but presented with an alternative worth exploring. Yeah, exactly. An alternative worth exploring, or a mindset that's different than what they already have. Most people who decline, they do it because they're unwilling to go through the effort, even if they might say they are. And that's not to impugn them to say that they're hypocrites or that they're bad people.
Yeah.
It's that there is a human inclination to inertia, which is good. Like, if you know what you have and it's predictable, in ways it is preferable to the unknown. Which on a second order effect creates a distrust of things that you are unfamiliar with. But in practice, especially when modernity has rewired people to have their default be what is in modern life and not what is in nature, or not what is more essentially intuitive to what reality or real life is, it can be dangerous, and for them it can be stulting. I've met people who I've told them about, like, my orange glasses, and they help me sleep, and I thought it was bullshit, but then I tried it for 2 weeks and then it worked, and I'm like, well, now I'm locked into it. And so I'm thinking of specifically of a friend of mine. She had told me, I suffer from insomnia, but if the solution is having to wear these glasses every night that look terrible and that don't go with any of my outfits, I kind of would rather keep the insomnia. And I'm like, well, All right, I at least respect that because the decision is more informed and you're making it on a certain level of integrity. But I still also
Yeah.
don't respect it because you're choosing a worse outcome than for something whose cost is so trivial. But
Right.
it's just as you're describing, there are things a person can control, but even if a person can modify them, not every person will. I
Right.
tell the gospel to so many people, but not everybody takes it. And even those who take it, it's still an uphill battle because, it implies sometimes small, but sometimes big changes in a person's life.
Right. Right. No, that angle of conversation with most people, and I refrain from it on Twitter for various reasons, specifically when it comes
Very
to weight
biased
loss stuff.
reasons, yes.
Yeah, right. So because what ends up happening is certain topics of conversation, people are so heavily invested in it that for them, anything that doesn't validate and reinforce that particular point of view is essentially a sign of war, right? Like we're going to go to war about this. And so, okay, look, your politics, your religion, your weight training routines, and your code editor, those are essentially your particular preference. Do as you wish, as long as you recognize the aspect of it that, like, I'll give you a clear-cut example. Just a couple of days ago, there was this conversation on Twitter, and this is a very relevant conversation. It's going to take a little bit of nuance, but I think you'll appreciate where I'm coming from.
Yeah,
the conversation was about people who experience back pain and have weak lower back or weak backs and whatnot, right? So when I hear that, because my background in anatomy, I'm like, okay, you have to be very specific. Where is this back pain? Is it your L4, L5? Is it your thoracic spine? Is it your neck? Because that's considered part of your back. So you need to be specific. But that's not even the issue. So we're right off the bat. Yeah, right off the bat, we're on the wrong foot here. Right? So the argument was, don't go see a doctor because the doctor is going to treat you like a nail because the doctor has a hammer, and they're going to recommend surgery for you, and they're going to verify that you need surgery because they're going to give you an MRI, and most people have some variation of subluxation, therefore it'll confirm that they need surgery. So therefore, don't go to the doctor, just go to the gym. So I said, okay, hold on a second. This argument was presented with some level of authority. I don't know. I'm not sure where it started or who really took it on, but it kind of took on a life of its own. But a younger man just a couple of days ago was asking me the same thing. He's like, hey, my lower back hurts. What should I do? This, that, and the other. So I said to him, I said, look, let's do the precautionary principle and apply it here. Right. So first and foremost, if a third of the people who are supposedly going into these places that actually do need this back surgery don't know that they need that back surgery, and they go into the gym and they pick up something very heavy, then guess what actually happens? You have to get the back surgery.
Exactly, yeah.
It is not worth your payoff to take that risk. What you can do as an intelligent human being is to say, okay, my back hurts. What I will do is I will start by just simply stretching out a little bit, right? My hamstrings may be tight, my quads, I don't know, something is out of my balance. And then I'll go see somebody, a chiro, physio, pick a person whose anatomy is their job, right? That's the kind of person I want to see. And let them tell you, hey, things look good, you're just weak. That's fine. That's the answer we're looking for. And even if they tell you, oh, your disc is this, that, and the other, it doesn't mean you have to go do surgery. What you could do is you could say, okay, what are the best ways to fix this problem without surgery, right? Because that's what people are afraid of. Strengthen your back along those paths, and then come to the gym and do the exercises that are going to help you, and that's great. But what's happened here is that there's this idealization of a certain set of parameters that are now pervasive within the group that we're traveling with, which is the following two things. One, everything in nature is good. Absolutely not true. We know that's not true.
Oh, they're totally not true. Like a tiger is not good for a human to be around. Like, come on.
No. And being around, open water with animals defecating everywhere, not good for humans, right? The natural water, I like this, I like that. I'm still in I'm like, relax yourself. Let's not lose our heads here. What you need to do, same thing with the weight routines. I think weight training is great, but I also know it's not for everybody, right? So if you're one of those people who it's not for, then it's not for you. No big deal. Go find something else, but go do something. Play volleyball, climb a mountain, wrestle a bear if that's what it is for you, right? It doesn't matter. Do something physical. But when it comes to the nature side of things, and I think Nassim had this point, because we're always trying to find this balance between preserving what is old and inviting what is new so that we can reap the benefits of it. And I think he hit the nail on the head when he said that if you move too fast, you discount the progress you've already made, so you don't get to reap the benefits of what you've already accomplished. If you move too slow, you may not have enough time to react to the new dynamic environment, and therefore you may not survive. So
Right.
the balance in all this is to not be a person who's a hermit living in a cabin somewhere, deadlifting rocks while you eat fish and spear them with your hands. That's not the that's not the balance you want.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
it's also,
that also removes from your humanity. Like, what kind of life are you even leading?
exactly, right? And the opposite of that is don't be the person who sits in a cubicle all day, getting into flame wars on Twitter, coming home to watch Netflix and eating pizza, and then going to bed chronically malnourished either. So there's a happy balance to be made everywhere you go, right? I think sometimes people, when they discover something new, they kind of get overzealous with it, and they get a little carried away with it, and they tend to go in a direction that sort of nullifies everything that came before it. And I noticed this very chronically true for people who are avid readers but slow thinkers, in the sense that they don't think quickly on their feet to say, hey, this new book that I just read is the answer to everything else I've ever never knew about in life. And like, relax yourself. Again, there is no such book that's going to give you the answer to all the problems that you have in your life. So when
Even the Bible is self-limiting on how much it actually tells you. Like, come on.
That's exactly it. But I'm noticing that I'm trying to help people fight this particular pernicious belief that one thing is the answer to everybody, right? And it's really not. So there's this junction at which we have to sort of balance the equation of, okay, modernity is great because you don't have to worry about a tiger eating you. That is not something you think about ever. Modernity is great because you can have access to food that's high quality because you just have to go to the market, pick out what it is you like. And most people,
modernity solves a lot of great problems. Like, I'm not dissing it for that stuff, exactly.
Yeah. And the place that I noticed is, and it's really weird because I like to cook, right? And I don't know where this idea came out that guys aren't supposed to cook. I don't know where that foolishness started, but I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you can't cook, your life's gonna suck. You need to eat 3 times a day, sometimes twice, hopefully, whatever the case is. You need to know how to make something that's good, because otherwise you're gonna hate your most precious activity that you do, which is a very personal thing that you do. And I always tell people, I'm like, food is an investment in your health, right? So you're gonna put something in your system, your body's gonna break it down, and then it's going to give you a net benefit or a net negative from that particular interaction. And if you don't love cooking and you don't know how to cook, I can almost guarantee that your life is going to suck, because the food that you're going to be constantly eating is going to be food that's going to be ill prepared, or it's going to be store bought and mass manufactured. And I can almost make these links to people. That's not a one-to-one connection, obviously, but all the healthy people that I know share this trait. They all like to cook. It's interesting, right? Like, why do you like to cook? Well, I want to know what goes in my meal. There's the answer, right? They know exactly. Oh, these are my herbs. Yeah, right. And the people who order food all the time. And here's what threw me off, right? Because I learned how to cook Italian from this friend of mine whose father owned the restaurant, and she so he used to invite me to the house, and he was old school Italian. He's like, Ace, dinner's gonna be 3 hours. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? He goes, it's gonna be 3 hours to make, 3 hours to eat. I'm like, okay, well, let's go. We'll get in the car. We're going to go grab all this stuff. So we'd go to like 2 different places to find the right tomatoes that he wanted, and this other farmer friend of his who gave him the right herbs. And it would take us like an hour and a half to get to each guy, and I was just sitting there going, what are you doing? But the man did it with such
effort for? Like, what's the point? I know, I get it.
But when we would come back, and then he's like, show me how you cut something. So I'm cutting. He goes, you don't know how to cut. I'm like, okay. He goes, let me teach you. So I'm like, all right. I'm happy to always learn new skills that I always thought I knew. But he taught me how to cook, and then he taught me how to love the process of cooking, the smells that come up when you're making it, and the love that goes into, sort of culling your favorite ingredients and then the dish you make. And so he taught me how to make really fancy Italian foods, but we never use sugar for anything. It's always like spicy foods, right? So if your marinara sauce had some spice in it, that's the flavor you wanted. It was never like anything else. But one time we went to a restaurant, and I ordered, and this is an Italian restaurant, so I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. I ordered this pasta dish, and the sauce was sweet. So I said, why is marinara sauce sweet? Oh, we add sugar. Why are you adding sugar to a marinara sauce? That's just what we do. I said, no, bro, I don't want sugar, and I don't want it in my pasta sauce. Like, what are you doing? And so I actually returned the meal, and I was like, okay, we're done with this. This can't be, because I like it spicy. I never want it sweet, and if it was sweet, don't use white sugar on my meal, right? At least give me the courtesy of saying, hey, at least it was just honey, which I could semi tolerate. But you're giving me white sugar on top of pasta that's gonna bloat me? No, we're out.
Yeah, this is nonsense. I definitely agree with you. And to go back to kind of the deeper point about, like, say, the process, and to dovetail it to what we were talking about earlier with, say, sales and skin in the game. For a lot of people who are entrepreneurially inclined and who want to own a business, my experience seeing them, and I obviously can't say, oh, this is the way to run a successful business, but what I can say is that from what I have seen, my experience has been those who love the process intrinsically, like if they like making their own amateur movies, if they like doing their own sewing, if they like making stuff that they, put on a listing on Etsy, even if it never sells, those who like doing the process intrinsically, if they continue doing it indefinitely, they will eventually get successful. And that's part of, like, the ergodic property of life, that, like, a person's station can be dynamic depending upon their exposure. But people who, especially real estate agents, which I can definitely say is true, a lot of people come to real estate, especially in markets like this where it's very successful and it's very profitable to do so, thinking that, oh, I could just walk in and start doing it. And when they find out that it's not, that, like, you have to scrimp and claw for just, like, that first one or two or three buyer's agreements or listing agreements, like, it's a lot of work, but it eventually becomes exponential and multiplicative as you acquire a good reputation and do good work. There's a big fallout, a big silent graveyard of real estate agents in the first, 1 or 2 years where, they just stopped because they weren't as successful as they wanted to be, or they just didn't care to learn the methodology or whatever. And just like you're describing about cooking, a friend, when I was younger, he expressed to me, Matthias, start cooking now, because you have to do it every single day of your life. If you just get a little better for just one meal a day, after a year, you'll be an incredible cook and you won't even realize what happened. And it's not even that hard. Yes, it'll cost a little bit to get better ingredients, and yes, you'll start to refine your palate to what you expect from a dish, but those will be good things that become built into your experience of making food and then eating it. And it's just like you're saying, like you related on Twitter a little while ago about treating cooking as a meditative experience, about loving it as a savor of creating something that's separate from just eating the food. And that's exactly the right kind of philosophy. Like it's why people enjoy making food for others that they know that they'll really like. It's like Fat Tony would say, it's grandmother wisdom.
100%. Nothing more grandmothers love to do than to feed you, right?
Yeah, and if your friend whose father told you about having how to make Italian food properly, if his mother were there, she would have been saying, "Oh, you want some food? You need to eat,"
Yeah. No, it's true. There's definitely layers to how there's things that I'm noticing, which is really weird. Young people, I do my own laundry, and again, it's weird. I like watching the washing machine spin. I don't know why. I look at it, I'm like, this is so cool, because before this was available, you have to take it to the river, beat it against a rock, and rub soap and whatnot
against it. You had to have your own
whole
soap. Yeah, exactly.
There's way too much work that's involved to get this to work. But now, here you are watching this machine spin, and I usually just have a book in front of me, and I read it, and I look at this thing, and the laundromat I go to, sometimes people come in and they don't know how to do laundry. And I'm like, okay, no problem. Not everybody has learned this, but somebody taught me, so I'm happy to teach them. And I explain the skill to them. And I find it interesting because that always leads to a conversation, right? And so I find out, so what exactly do? Oh, I'm starting to be a doctor. I'm like, okay, that's cool, but why weren't you taught how to do laundry, right? Like there's disconnect. I'm like, see, you're on the modernity side, you've clinged on to one thing that's really amazing, which is cool. But on the other aspect of it, you don't know how to do laundry, and you're 32. Okay, cool. I mean, that's a long time to not have a vital life skill, but that's okay. It happens. And same thing, they don't know how to cook, right? Like, it's just you ask them like, what is your best dish that you can make? Like, if you came to my house and said, all right, Ace, I'm staying with you for a weekend. Just delight me with everything that it is you know how to make. I will have amazing meals for you for breakfast, lunch, dinner, fasting times, barbecue, all that stuff. It'll be you'll like okay, as whatever happens at
Oh,
eight.
yeah, I've
Whatever,
seen your Twitter. I know all about how great the meals you make are.
right? So that's the type of thing. And what's interesting about it is that I've noticed this weird correlation. It's a small sample set, so please don't extract too big from it for our listeners. People who know how to cook also know how to talk. It's weird. They have great conversations. You talk to them about stuff, and they're like chopping, they're singing, there's music playing in the background. They're talking to you about this, they're talking to you about that. They're not really stressed about anything unnecessarily. The people who don't have time to do any of these things are chronically sitting on the couch watching TV and don't know how to cook. I'm like, where's this weird disconnect? How come I'm seeing these patterns that apparently are not necessarily paying attention to all the factors around them, and it sort of has this weird connection to it all, right? So this whole crew, this Ruri crew that we're all sort of a journeyman to, and like I said to Firaz when he was on the podcast, that we're all just like a bunch of cats, right? You can't really hurt us together, because we all we're kind of and Shashank is like this, is that like even when we all agree, we still find things to disagree about just because some of us are disagreeable in our personality types, and we want to argue about it, not to be rude or mendacious or vicious, but just because it's like, I have this idea. Let me pitch this and see how many ways people can put bullets in it so I can make this idea better. So
right.
So
test the strength of it.
Exactly. And if you don't test it, and as I was talking to Joel the other day, we were talking about the whole idea that a set of assumptions may be true within a limited context of a range of stresses that it can handle and it's bounded under. Right? It's cool to cook for 5 people when they're your friends. I imagine it's unfortunately disastrous to cook for 500 people if there's a wedding party and that's who you're catering for, right? That I wouldn't want to do, right? So there's layers to this, right? So it kind of ties all that into it. And you know what? Who else is a really good cook is Ember. She teases me with some of the stuff she cooks, so she can chime in on her take on all this.
Yeah, I think it's mandatory to learn how to cook, especially if you find yourself in a position where you don't have anybody else feeding you. When I moved out, I didn't have my mom cooking my meals, so it's like Mr. Noodles every single day if you don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
That is not fun. No. I started cooking when I was 12. My mom made sure to put me right in front of the stove and teach me how to start from the basics, which was eggs. And then I picked up the skill. I really liked cooking in general. So I used to make giant meals for the whole entire family when I was 14. I would make the food so much that my mom had to mix and stir the ingredients in because the pot was so big and it was bigger than me sometimes. So
wow.
I enjoyed making food a lot. I think it connects people together as well. You definitely have good conversations over a good meal.
Yeah, definitely. I along the lines of what you're describing, there's a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine named Michael. He works at a tech job in New York City, and he makes an excellent living. And I actually stayed with him when I was at attending Ruri of last year, and I looked in his fridge just out of curiosity before one morning before he had gotten up, and I saw it was totally empty. And later in the day, I asked him, Michael, how do you what do you make when you cook? And he says, oh, I don't cook. And I looked at him with narrowed eyes, and he's like, yeah, well, where I work, they provide food, and I just make enough money that if I want to go out to eat, that's just what I do every night. And I'm like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I certainly get the idea of appreciating food, especially the creativity of other chefs and other people who do things or approach making meals differently than you. But when you have completely outsourced one of the fundamental things of life, to me, it created a level of cognitive dissonance. There is just like Ember you described, there's a pride in making food, not just for yourself, but the ability to make it for other people.
Yeah.
It's like the movie Ratatouille, that like there is a joy that it creates that's aesthetic in nature, in addition to it being functional.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true in that regard, because what I was talking to some of the guys on a few podcasts ago was that this whole process of taking pride in it, right? So people are busy. I'm like, you're not that busy that you can't do this. Right? I'm a busy person. I work 7 days a week, and I love it because it doesn't feel like work to me. I lift weights 3 times a week. I go play volleyball 2 nights a week. I do this podcast once a week whenever we have guests that are lined up. So if you're gonna give me the busy card, we're gonna have to flip that deck back right onto you, because to say no, you're not busy. But what's
You can
interesting
wait
is
an hour and a half to sit down at a meal in a restaurant, but you can't make your own food in half an hour. Like, come on.
Exactly, right? And that's the part of it. And I always get to the bottom of it. I'm like, okay, either you don't like washing dishes, which is, I can actually relate to that, which is fine, but that's not an excuse. That's a chronic excuse that's going to backfire against you. Or you just don't know how to cook and you don't want to learn how to cook, which is unfortunate, because it is a life, like, it is one of those things that you really have to know how to do, right? You can't just go through life without knowing how to make a decent steak or an omelet of some sort. But it ties into this, right? There's this whole layer of and I was talking to Gordon and Alex about this, is that there's this notion about energy and pride in terms of what it is you do with yourself, right? So you get up, you shave. Well, I don't need to shave. No. It talks about the aspect of putting effort in. You comb your hair properly. That's effort being put in. You make your bed before you leave the house. That's effort being put in. All of those can save you time if you don't do them. That's true. But what it does to you is it lowers the bar of expectations for your own effort against what you're willing to put up. Because people get into this frame of reference where they say, I will really step up when the big things come my way. And I always tell them, I'm like, if you can't get the small things right, that's A, that you don't know when that's going to be, but B, more importantly, if you can't handle the little things, the big thing's going to crush you. So if you can't show up, right? If you can't cook because you're too lazy, then what's going to happen is you're going to go into work, and whatever project they give you, you're going to look down on that project to say, this is beneath me. I don't need to do this. This is stupid. I hate this job, blah, blah, blah. Your brain's going to say, oh, okay, we're calling it in, no problem. And then you'll do a lazy job, and then you won't get, an opportunity to do something else. And then you'll blame the system. Oh, it's politics. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. I'm like, okay, carry on, right? Like, there's some people, there was a Yogi Bear quote literally this morning. If some people don't know it, they'll never know it, right? I love those Yogi Bear quotes, but it speaks to this.
Yeah.
So I love how all that stuff ties in, and it's always based on risk, right? Because a little bit of cooking is a little bit of risk, right? And the reward of it is your own meal that you get to eat with your own hands. And along the way, you get to sort of experiment, like, oh, this is how you make lemonade. Like I experimented this morning. Oh, you make lemonade, freshly squeezed limes, a little bit of lemon, a little bit of honey, and then let me try a pinch of vanilla extract. Why would you try that? I don't know. Maybe it's going to suck. Maybe it's going to be good. Turned out to be fantastic.
Right. If it doesn't work, I just get some more lemons. Like, the downside is found.
Yeah. And the upside of it is, hey, there's a fresh drink that I made that I like. So I finished it, and it was like a tiny glass. I said, I'm going to make a little bit more, and this time I'm going to add crushed mint in there, right? Just to give it a little freshness, right? It took it to the next level. Well, that allowed my brain, I gave my brain explicit permission to experiment, because we weren't saying this is beneath us. Oh, I don't need to do this. I could just, whatever. No. Let's try something. Oh, that was really good. Well, what if you try something a little extra? Oh, what do we have? Mint plant. Let's grab some mint, crush that up, chuck it in there, let it wrap itself around a piece of ice, taste it. It was so refreshing that I almost just I was literally going to cancel this podcast and just sit there drinking lemonade.
If you had messaged me and told me that that's why we had to cancel, I would have totally understood. I thought, especially if you find something that really works.
Yeah.
Along that lines, the friend of mine who encouraged me when I was younger to learn to cook, something that I marinated on after he said it was, it's easier now for a person to learn to cook well without being clever than it has ever been in human history, at least in the modern developed world, because the availability of high quality ingredients that are fresh and that would otherwise have been exotic as recently as 300 or 400 years ago are now just abundant. Like you can add stuff in that nobody would have even thought to do years ago, simply because you can. It's not expensive to add cumin or saffron or something to a dish just to see if it's good.
Yeah. And I've ruined many a dish just being experimental with it. But at the same time, when one comes out that's right, oh man, that goes in the book. It's like, okay.
Oh, you're about to say you write it down and you do it again.
Yeah, exactly. So here's what's interesting about this, right? So I talk to a lot of the guys, some of the younger guys that talk to me at work and and some of the ladies also. They're like, hey, it's easy for you to talk this way because you get to talk to Joe and Nassim and these guys, and they're really accomplished people, this, that, and the other, and so it's easy for you to talk about all this stuff. But for me, it's difficult because I'm in a toxic environment. The people around me aren't super positive, and they're not go-getters, and they always doubt me. I said, okay, let me just stop you right there for a second. Let me explain the difference in mentality between, and I've distilled this from the Kipling poem, the If poem, but to elaborate on it, I always tell them the following story. I'm like, look, most of people's lives are basically a fantasy that they've constructed from watching movies. And in the movie, what they really do is they cut out all the boring parts. It's always the fun stuff, right? Oh, I met the girl. Oh, we had dinner. Oh, we're getting married. All that stuff. But here's what's interesting. All the fun stuff that happens in your life is the stuff that happens daily. But people are waiting for their vacation. And I'm like, if you know how to make a really good meal and you're at work and you're thinking, man, I can't wait to pull into the farmer's market, pick up some fresh parsley. Because I have my farmer's phone number. This guy doesn't like phones, but he gave me his number because when I meet with him, I ask him about what's the irrigation technique? How do you keep your soil fresh? What's happening with the nutrients and what's happening with nitrogen? Do you know how much they're dying to tell somebody that piece of information? Because nobody asks. So they're like, oh my God, you want to know?
Care about. And as soon as somebody else cares about it, they're like, oh man, it feels like a kindred spirit. Yeah.
I asked him, I said, hey man, I don't know anything about farming. He's like, obviously, because you're here. I look at you, you've never done farming a day of your life. That's a fact, right? I went up to that, but I said, so let me ask you a question. So you plant seeds of whatever crop you're growing, but then you deplete the soil of nutrients. So how do you circumvent that? He goes, you don't plant the same thing every year. You change it because different things that you plant have different requirements. And then you let the chickens graze. And when they do their droppings and they do their pickings, they get rid of the stuff that you don't need, and nature takes care of the rest of it. As long as you're not putting poison into your plot of land, it'll take care of you as long as you respect it. So I'm like, oh, interesting point of view, right? So he's explaining to me this, and we're talking about parsley and how you could tell if parsley's been grown right, and what kind of water saturation levels are required, and how much sun is needed. And this is completely all chemistry at this point. But this gentleman, who basically is a farmer, and he's been farming since his great-granddad taught him how to do it, is explaining all this stuff to me. And then his wife happens to be a baker. So I talked to her, and she's explaining to me how to tell if eggs are good. Because I used to tell her, I'm like, I really love eggs, but I'm very apprehensive with eggs. Because sometimes I make steak and eggs, and the eggs are terrible. She's like, yeah, I know, right? It kind of ruins the whole flow. I'm like, but I wish I knew if I could at least tell which egg was bad. And she goes, come here, let me teach you. So I walk over to this lady, and she explains to me, and I'm not going to explain this to anybody else, because if you want to know how that's done, go talk to a local farmer. Go
talk to your local farmer, your baker,
right?
Meet someone real.
Yeah, they explain these things to you because that's how they made their living, and they love doing it. So she's explaining it to me, and ever since that day, as I've been making, eggs, and I've been, making my other dishes with all these herbs, there's these layers of conversation, this art form that's been lost. And so tied back into the original conversation with the Rory guys, and Nassim and Joe, and I'm like, first of all, I don't know Nassim. I know of Nassim, but I don't know Nassim. So let's not get that twisted.
We've liked each other's tweets on Twitter now and then.
Yeah,
I've never sat down and walked around New York City with him.
Yeah, we haven't had squid ink together. But what I'm saying is that the vast majority of the joy that comes from, and you could tell the guys, Trish talks about his various Indian dishes that he makes, and he's hacking away. Or Joe talking about the dogs in the water and all that stuff.
The garden that he has.
Yeah, or Guru talking about how much he hates garlic. But what's interesting about all these conversations is that that's the daily stuff that we do that brings us so much joy that we don't have to look forward to quote unquote a vacation. For us, the vacation is the icing on top of the cake, because the cake itself is so good that our everyday lives are enriched by the fact that we're not looking for some distant event when we're going to quote unquote have fun or it's going to be great. Yeah. No, it's like, how do I have fun right now in this instance?
And along that line, to talk about sort of perversion of modernity, when you related earlier how so much of advertisement is engineered towards things that are like ethereal, a lot of consumer culture is the subversion of that right impulse of appreciating the aesthetics that exist in life, and replacing it with things that are product centered. You know, people love Amazon because Amazon like getting fast food, or like, you know, taking drugs to relieve themselves of some affliction temporarily, because it's pseudo immediate. Yes, you don't get the product as soon as you hit, you know, submit order in Amazon, but like it creates this experience. Like, you have this thing to look forward to, and you're going to be a little happy when you get this product that you don't need, and you'll appreciate it for a little while, and maybe you'll keep using it, and that's cool, but most of the time you won't, and it'll just be another thing cluttering up your house that you don't want to get rid of because you remember how much money you spent on it. And and like, it's a pernicious form, like a lot of things, it's a pernicious form of trying to subvert that for the sake of like some very cheap but aggregately very valuable money making. And most people, I don't want to say they're trapped, but they retain that pattern of doing that, despite that fundamental like mode of the daily, and what you look forward to could be something that's, you know, much more fulfilling, like you're describing about the meal you can make at home that's not even that long, you know, dishwashing notwithstanding, or not even that sophisticated to make, or you know, just for a lot of people, just being around your spouse, you know, like how people say that at home they find it a chore to be around their spouse, but it didn't used to be that way. And it's like, well, you know, I can't tell you how to have your marriage, but the fact that it didn't used to be that way means that you can go get it back. Like, the relationship's not irreparable, you know, but it's emblematic of like a bigger philosophy, just like you're describing of these people who complain that, oh, you know, we don't have the positivity around us. Well, you know, humans, unique among all organisms, have the ability to modify their environment. Like, yes, it takes a little bit of work, but the payoff is huge.
What's interesting about that is I relate it to you in the following way, right? So this little things that I like to do that sort of remind me of how this approach can be better for everybody else around me. So whenever I talk to people and I will say to them, I'm like, you know, think of somebody you think is attractive. Right? What is it about their attractive qualities that draw your attention to them? And it's almost always this layer of symmetry that's built into it, right? Oh, their face is beautiful, it's symmetrical, or this, that, and the other. I'm like, okay, cool. Think about the same thing that applies to a piece of jewelry, or a car, or, you know, a flower, or a dish. You know, when you see chefs, when they're presenting food, its presentation becomes part of the equation. So what I did was I said, okay, I want to embody this aspect of appreciating this for myself. So I bought this ring. It's a very special ring. It's a tungsten ring. It's black on the outside and it's blue on the inside. And inside of it is the inscription by the great poet John Keats' famous couplet, which says that, you know, truth is beauty, beauty is truth. Right. So I put that ring on every morning, and as I'm putting it on, I remind myself that, look, if you pursue truth, it will be beautiful. And if you pursue beautiful things, they can only come about if it's truthful to self. So the first thing I do, I'm like, hey, I'm making my bed. What if somebody walked in here? What would I want them to see? And so it's a simple thing, right? Okay, well, what's a beautiful way to lay out this bed versus a sloppy way to lay out this bed? And there's where you start, right? You just start simple, and you say, okay, cool. What about how I dress, how I, you know, and obviously people are like, oh, I don't have money to buy our money. I'm like, this is not about our money. This is about, can you put together something that looks reasonable and you could pursue that out the door? How about when I introduce myself to my neighbor while we're waiting for the elevator? What is the most beautiful thing I could say? Good morning. how are you today? Did you get a good night's rest? Most people are so miserable, they're stuck with faces in their phones that they don't want to talk to their neighbors, all these other things that happen.
Yeah, they distrust you if you even try to talk to them, you know?
Right. And so it sort of escalates beyond the stage, right? So I always start my morning with that ring, right? So I get out of the shower and I put on that ring, and it's kind of like, it's this weird thing. I grew up, I guess, when I was a kid, I grew up watching this cartoon. I think it was called Captain Planet or something, where they wore a bunch of rings and like the ring was a superpower. I don't know. It got stuck in my psyche.
I think it was Captain Planet, yeah.
It got stuck in my psyche, right? So this was always my power. It's like, okay, I wear this ring, and it reminds me, and here's how it translates, which is weird. The food I make, the way I clean up my plate afterwards. When I write code, I comment my code. I use a specific font that looks beautiful to look at. There's colors that are built into my editor. None of that is necessary, but it is necessary in the sense that if you care enough about the way this thing looks when you're writing it, you're going to care enough about how it functions when you're pushing it out to people to use it. And then that translates to my users. I'm like, okay, I write software for a living. Okay, my user comes onto this system. Let me assume that my user hates computers. Let me assume that my user doesn't like to be challenged. They just want to sort of figure it out on the spot. So how can I do that? What if I think for 30 minutes to save them 1 minute of trouble? I'll multiply that by 1,800 people who are using the software internally at the company. How much time am I saving them? So the truth and beauty equation right there is always asymmetrical. Right? So it ties up. It's like, oh, okay, use this. Well, what about if we use colors on the user interface to denote information? If something is bad, give it a color red. If something is good, give it a color green. Something is really good, give it a color purple. It's almost majestic, right? It's a little story.
Yeah, this is, in a lot of ways, it's a fat-tailed effect. Like, if you do it well, the upside is multiplicative, and if you do it poorly, by contrast, like, it has this cascading downside. Obviously, the presumption is you're doing everything you can not to do it poorly. It was more just, when you add these features, because it is gleaned and used dynamically and interactively among the people you're doing it to serve, like you create this effect that kind of runs away with itself. Like after a point, it improves on its own because people recognize how much it adds, and they can leverage it in a lot of ways, maybe ways that you didn't necessarily anticipate that they were going to use.
Well, see, the perfect thing about that is when you're in a corporate environment, corporate software is written by people who have zero taste for aesthetics, right? So they have no sense. And I say that with the absolute truth of it all, because the internal tools we use, and Amber could attest to this because she works in the same place I do, are so god-awful that it hurts your eyes to look at them. So I'm like, right off the bat, my competition has set the bar. My competition has set the bar so low that with bare minimal effort, I can exceed and supersede what anybody else can possibly fathom these things to be like. But what's awesome about it is, and my partner who we write code with together at work, I always tell him, I'm like, he goes, how do we know we got this right? I'm like, it's very simple. We're going to show our user interface to our users. And as soon as they see it, they're going to say one thing to us. They're going to say, of course, that's how it should be done. I said, that's when you know you've got it right, because they don't have anything to add, and they're not asking you to remove anything. They're giving you what they think they would have done had they designed it. Meanwhile, these are the same people that if you go back 3 months when we're asking them, okay, what do you want this to look like? I don't know, right? They don't know what to look for. But when you show them the right answer to the problem, they assume your answer is what their answer would have been had they been in charge of putting in together.
Exactly. It's like so how Joe described on the podcast you released, that preferences are hidden because behaviors to try and arrive at or seek what people report as preferences are inherently faulty and context specific. And it dovetails to a bigger point that Nassim had made, like polls are useless because people do not reveal preferences through answering a questionnaire. They reveal through behavior. And, obviously it's not entirely behavior when you demo a product, but just like you're describing, they don't know what they want, but they do recognize what they would have wanted when they're presented with it.
Yes. And that's the key thing that we're always harping on, is that if you pursue beauty, and people think, beauty is a superficial concept. I'm like, no. Beauty, if you speak to really profoundly introverted mathematician types, they'll tell you that they always describe a mathematical solution as elegant and beautiful.
Elegant, yes.
Like, There it is, right? Of all the people in the world that you would expect to use that word, here's a mathematician telling you that the symmetry
People
that
who
they found.
hate reading poetry as on philosophy, like, you know?
Yep, yep. And they'll describe it in that way to you. And so for me, the word actually connotates an energy level, right? It's like, this is the level of effort I'm willing to put into something because I want the end result to be beautiful, right? So that is the core aesthetic of pursuing truth, is that truth in itself is beautiful. And if you apply truth to your system, if you remove inflammation, if you pay attention to what's going on around you, if you create value for others, and you not only clip fat tails on the left side for yourself, but you try to actively clip those for others around you, you get opportunities that blossom in front of you, right? And it's kind of weird because right now on this podcast with us is a person who's literally experienced this in a short span of time. Like, so to give you some ideas, there are jobs that I've managed to secure as a side business that is too much for me to handle. And then I have to say, hey, Ember, guess what? You just got a new job. And she's like, what? I didn't even apply for anything. I'm like, that's too bad because I need you to do the following 4 or 5 things for me. Right? So,
Ember, you have been voluntold, okay?
I am volleying.
Right? And so she gets to jump on this train, and she came along, wanting to study Nassim's work. And I told her, I said, you're going to read some Marshall McLuhan because the way that guy thinks, there are people in this world who are 1 in 7 billion, right? There are people who walk this earth who are so exceptional at what they do, and that their frame of reference is so beautiful that even if you can't arrive at those conclusions on your own, you're still clever and smart enough to appreciate their conclusions once you've read them. Similar to how people, when they see the software solution that's aesthetically perfect, and what I mean by that is that it solves their problem. So if you look at like the way Apple designs their software, you may or may not be an Apple fan, but what you do know is that even a baby, and I have many nieces and nephews, maybe Wavy, she just turned 1. You put her in front of an iPad and she knows exactly what to do. Right? And that's because those guys at Apple spent time figuring out that this is the way it should be done so that a baby doesn't need instructions for it. Just like a baby doesn't need instructions to put food in her mouth. Right?
And it's further than that, which personally is kind of what both amazes me and where I came from aesthetically. Not only is it so intuitive that you just know it as though it's how it should have always been, but sometimes it rewrites how a person thinks about the way it should have been times previous, or how they thought of other previous experiences. Someone who uses an iPad after having only used, say, an Android tablet, while they are very similar, they'll use the iPad and think to themselves, man, now I understand why I didn't like certain things on the previous experience, or why, I like certain things that this one does before. And the idea of influence being retroactive in addition to interactive comes from my having read, of all things, Shakespeare, and some of the critical commentary on it by a great critic, a man named Harold Bloom, a man who, much like Nassim, is skeptical towards modernity and reacts against bullshit in his domain. In case of Bloom, it's in literature and aesthetics, of which there is very much in universities long before what's happening with social justice on campuses in the past 5 or 10 years. And something he related about Shakespeare specifically, but just about any great writer whose consciousness is sufficiently strong that it creates a rereading effect. If you take in their work, it molds how you think in such a way that it modifies how you would reinterpret things that you had even encountered before. Like reading Othello and seeing Iago go silent after having made his machinations and been so cleverly amoral suddenly makes you reconsider how the parson, when he relates the Parson's Tale in Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, does the same thing, where he deliberately goes silent after having been amoral, and then it provokes the reader to speculate what the relationship between the parson and Iago is, and the nature of influence. which is not not to get too far away from what you're describing about the process of software development and how in human behavior, if you show someone what it is they wanted, even if they couldn't tell you that's what it was,
Right.
there's that property that people have. And to even dovetail it even further back, while I totally agree with you about Scott Adams being in some ways an IYI like Nate Silver, unlike Nate Silver, at least Scott Adams admits he is applying a pseudo hypnotist filter. He's not pretending to be scientific. And,
Right.
Obviously, as you saw with his interaction with Joe Norman, when confronted with real science that may not be
Shoved under the rug.
that are hard to confront using the filter he uses, like it creates cognitive dissonance and he can't answer it.
Right.
The reason I still happen to kind of follow him occasionally is that view of the world where humans are permeable and where they are able to be influenced, much like reading Shakespeare can do to a person, or like how as Bloom would maintain that the Shakespearean influence on personality has affected like all of literature that's come since.
Yep.
Being aware of this property that is active both in media but just in personalities and what it means to be memorable is valuable in and of itself. And while it can be hard to spot, you can be trained to see it. And as you're relating with your experiences with Ember and just working in the corporate world, you can see a domain in which it's totally true with how people respond, and then they suddenly become more receptive to new ideas that you present them as soon as you show them something that they really like and that they're good. And now suddenly, it's like if they didn't like any of your project ideas before, but then they like this one, suddenly they're like, oh, well, what else do you have? And you could even show them the same ideas, but then they're going to be like, oh, well, we like it now, without realizing what's going on in their head.
No, you know what's amazing about that is that you're one of the first people I've found who also has an appreciation for literature, and I have been, when I can't read something technical because for work related, or if I'm not reading something from the guys, I revert back to Shakespeare. I have a collection of poems from all the best, right? So, but when you went down that road, I was just skipping along because I'm like, yes. Finally, somebody else who gets this idea, because Shakespeare's influence not only influences my thought patterns in terms of how I create things, but it also influences music, because music is influenced by the rhythmic ideas of his poetry. And then I listen to a lot of hip hop. And then when I find a hip hop artist, I'm like, look, this is a person who's essentially carrying the torch from the Shakespearean times. This is their modern interpretation of it. They're telling you a story, but they're telling it to you in their way. But it's also reflective and reactive to what came before it. And if you read James Joyce, when you read Finnegan's Wake, or if you read, the Portrait of an Artist of a Young Man, when you read these works and you read Marshall McLuhan, who is a Joyce scholar, and he tells you things like, look, if an alien civilization showed up tomorrow, and as soon as they showed up here, we know two things right off the bat. One, and this is not McLuhan speaking, this is me paraphrasing a set of ideas from McLuhan, is that holding up an iPhone and doing a Google search to this advanced alien civilization is not going to get you anything, because clearly they have technology beyond ours because they got here, right? So that's the first thing.
Exactly.
What can you hold
We're not going to impress them with our scientific achievements.
No, but what you can do is, to paraphrase McLuhan's own ideas, is to hold up Finnegan's Wake and say, within this tome is the recreation of civilization itself. This is the complete history of all the things that we've achieved from art and literature into our 10,000-year history across the civilizations of the world, because Joyce basically managed to paraphrase and summarize every works of literature that came before him as a throwaway sentence in his conversations, right? So
built into like the Wake is generators for all kinds of ideas or extensions of an idea that a person could make whole works upon later on, which, obviously Finnegan's Wake, it owes debts of influence in other places, but as a condensation of all of that put together, you can take a page or several pages from it, and from that, like I mentioned, generate things that produce ideas that riff off of what was written. If in part because of the linguistic nimbleness, in part because of the strength of certain ideas and certain poetry presented. I mean, Finnegan's Wake, even though it's presented in prose, like it has to be read like a poem because every word is so precisely chosen, and the relationships between how it narrates requires close scrutiny, just first to understand, but also to recognize its place within this bigger whole of what it's trying to do.
Yeah, no, in that regard, I it's funny because everybody I've met, and this is just a consequence of just misfortune in the sense that public education has failed miserably, is that people don't like math and they don't like poetry. And I'm like, how can you, right? It's like two of the most fundamental things that bring joy you don't like, and I know why it is. And I'm like, okay, let me rephrase all this out for you. So when you read poetry, it's the most distilled form of art that you can imagine. Why? Well, because the poet, unlike the writer of a novel, has a limited set of words that they can choose to convey their message, but they have to arrest your attention long enough for you to want to read it, right? So that is a daunting task if there ever was one. And if the poem is good enough that it survives past their lifetime, then it's worth reading and rereading all over again, because within it, you are reading a piece of poetry from a poet in a particular period of time, whose influence was the previous authors, whose epoch was the political milieu of the time, and the influence of the wars that preceded and influenced this person's life is encapsulating all of that history into just this one little section of thought as a stream of consciousness from this person. So if you can't appreciate that, then I'm afraid that a lot of beauty is going to be left unresolved for you, because you're not going to be able to harvest that field and to retain the joy that comes from being able to do something like that. And it works in the following way. As you were mentioning earlier, when they see the software that we create, and I take pride in my work. I take everything else completely, nonchalantly. I joke around all the time, but my work I take very seriously. And here's what's interesting about it.
Right, it's a reflection of who you are, like when you do it well, especially.
Exactly, because you pour your heart and soul into it, you think about a problem, and you get it done right. But here's what happens, and I've known when I got it right. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen sufficiently enough that I can validate it with some statistical analysis and say, hey, sample size is decent, but I can say this is when it's done right. When it's done right, they go back to all the other corporate software that they were using, and they go, man, this stuff is awful. I'm like, yeah, now you're getting it. Because now the bar is set by the work we do, because they go, oh, all future tools need to look like this, because this is amazing. Because you've taken this nasty problem with like 3 menus hidden inside 2 menus for me to figure out something, and they give it to me in this information in a way that I can't really digest. You're just showing it to me at a glance. I could figure out exactly what my problem is. That's amazing. But that's just the second order effect of having good software that's informed by poetry, art, literature, and film.
Right.
Because you can't do that level of work, because pure engineering is pure engineering, but it's not beautiful.
Right. It's the equivalent of food would be like, eating tuna cans and, chocolate, like purely functional.
Purely, and it doesn't work in that regard. But if it's informed, a little bit of poetry, this starts to work itself around it. But I had this conversation with one of my bosses, and I said to her, so listen, here's what's interesting about what you've discovered. Because as she was just interacting with my software, and it was a problem particularly for her to solve, because what she ends up getting is she gets these 15 to 16 spreadsheets every week, and there's these weird graphs, and she has to go through all this. She has to explain that to her boss. Just mind-numbing, right? So she hates it. So I said, look, send me those spreadsheets, and then I'll create these beautiful charts that are on this website called AM Charts. It's a free JavaScript library, but you can actually sort of digest that system. And they give you these gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous ways to display this information. And I showed it to her, and she just stared at it. She goes, wow. Now if my boss asks me what's happening, I can actually look at him in the face and give him a straight answer, because now I don't have to go, I don't know, let me go find this freaking spreadsheet 7015. But what was interesting was she drew the next conclusion, and I wanted to kind of set her up in that direction, but I didn't want to quite necessarily take her there myself. So I said, okay, I want you to think about something. You just launched a program, not with me, but another group, where you've brought people in who've created a game to train your staff to use the crappy tools that you already have bought in this company. Right? So think about what just happened here. You invested money, you bought some software tools. The tools are so bad that your agents can't figure out how to use them. And instead of figuring out maybe the tools are the problem, you jump to the conclusion that my agents are the problem. And so the consequence, you went out and you bought another tool to help your students or your agents be actively engaged enough to remember how to use these tools by gamifying their use case.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? Like
a complete perversion of skin in the game because of the corporate structure.
Exactly. But if that first tool was properly designed, and if it was designed with the aesthetic in mind of respecting the user's time and respecting the user's patience and respecting their valuable input so that they wouldn't have to think about all this, so they wouldn't forget how to use it, you wouldn't have had to go and hire this next company. So in a way, right. I told her, I said, look, and she goes, well, I see what your point is. So I guess that's pretty good take on your part because, obviously you're making pretty good connections for me. I said, well, here's the thing I want you to understand. This is not about arrogance or vanity or anything like that. What this really tells you is that I'm basically a garbage man because what I'm doing here is I'm cleaning up the mess that came before me. Because if the solution to these problems were conceived by people who at least had my inclination for how to look at these problems, and it's not like it's the perfect solution, but at the very least, I could tell you that it would have helped you avoid all these other sorts of issues that you're currently facing, right?
Right. So, well, I mean, if maybe you aren't solving it, like you're at least identifying the problem so they're aware of it, which is more than anyone has done for them to this point.
Exactly. So this whole aesthetic, I love meeting engineers, but if I meet an engineer who appreciates poetry, it's like a whole other level. I'm like, okay, now we could really, because it changes the entire atmosphere of the conversation. Because a lot of the people who we talk to, they're not necessarily appreciative of literature per se, or they are, but they haven't read it, or they have read it, but they don't understand it, but they kind of understand it, but they don't understand the meaning behind it. It's like, okay, what are you judging this sentence by? So when I say, truth is beauty, beauty is truth, and what's beautiful about that sentence is you can also flip it. You could say beauty is truth and truth is beauty. It works both ways, right?
Right, so, right. What if the truth is harsh and disturbing? How could that be beautiful? And then explaining there's this intrinsic property,
Exactly. And what was interesting about that was that first ring, where the poem was written exactly as it was. That line was stated. I lost that ring temporarily because I don't know where, it was misplaced. But I had a friend replace that ring for me. And what was interesting about it was she got the quote for me, but I had said it backwards. And she got me the ring, replaced it, but it said the phrase backward, but it still worked. So
right, exactly.
I have two rings that have the same sentence flipped in both directions, but it still works. And that's what I love about it. It's sort of it's almost like a palindrome when it comes to the meaning of it. Right? So you can read it in either way. It still works.
One of my favorite verses of scripture does the same thing. When Christ describes how if you have a sheep and you go out to like if one sheep is astray, you leave the rest, you leave your flock to go get it, and then he describes that your treasures are relative to where you want to go search for them, and he says, store up your treasures in heaven and so forth. And in Matthew 6:21 he says, for where your treasure is, there shall your heart be also. And it's the same idea. Like you could flip that and it's still true. And obviously that one line is a condensation of several ideas, but even if you didn't have the context for it, it's still profound.
No, of course. That's why I think the whole concept of Lindy, because I've been always trying to think about it in that regard, right? Because how is religious ideas and how are religious texts Lindy? And I found out what makes them Lindy. And it's kind of what this thing that Joel was talking about last time. And it's sort of this thing that Nassim harks on, is that what you don't want to do is you don't want to overprescribe a solution to a problem. Because then it becomes very specific and it gets blocked in time. Right now, it only makes sense for when you set it to maybe a couple of years. But if you have a general solution that's sort of vague, but if you leave room for interpretation, the dynamics of human culture and the time that passes through it allows that system to actually maintain its timelessness quality, right? Sometimes you listen to some music and it's timeless, and it's like, well, how come that's timeless? And this other piece of music which is just basically trash, but it's hot for the summer, right? So it has that same quality. It has that same fundamental feel to it, which is like, hey, you know what? Somebody, and I think I've kind of managed to slightly uncover the secret behind that. And this is a first stab attempt at it, but I think what it is if you think long and hard about a problem, you may come to a solution to that problem that's general enough that it will surpass your lifetime. And that's what I think that these profound sacred texts and these works of literature and this work of poetry and this timelessness does, because the people who usually come up with this stuff, they suffered for their art. And that's what I mean by that, is that they've put time into it. They've thought about it long and hard, and they've lost sleep over it. And they've, like Picasso and his paintings, and Chopin and his music, and Beethoven and his music, and one of my current favorite rappers, Jid, and his music. And you kind of listen to it, and there's this weird thread across all of them, which is like, you know what? At a certain level, when you're creating art, it doesn't matter how that art manifests itself in reality. What matters is the intention and the effort to bring that into reality that allows it to sustain itself past the duration of the typical lifetime of a product that's sort of quote unquote commercial in nature.
Yeah. When you had asked me about kind of what my biography was and my background was, something that I brought up and had mentioned earlier in this podcast was that my first interest was actually in movies. And it's in movies that I kind of discovered how there are properties of fat-tailed effects. Like, for example, studios are constantly buying quote-unquote cheap options because the market always serves screenwriters who are amateurs with soul in the game and who are willing to sell cheap options and write screenplays purely on speculation. But if they make it, then the success continues to compound on itself. Because even if they're as good as any other screenwriter who could have made it, if they get the right opportunity, then that they can parlay that further, if given a level of aesthetic quality. And I tried to reconcile that marketplace effect with movies that seem to endure. Like, why is North by Northwest so good? Why is The Rules of the Game by Jean Renoir so good? Why do we love Alfred Hitchcock? That sort of thing. And to dovetail to what you're describing about the Lindy effect and how that relates to the aesthetic barriers or thresholds that an artist produces or imposes on themselves, even to dovetail it to Shakespeare, like the stronger the thought that someone imposes on what that is they want to make, the longer you can expect it to last, contingent on the strength of that thought being what they expect. And even if that goes unnoticed, Van Gogh was not appreciated in his day, but then years later, because his work had been able to survive, it then was. I don't know any of Van Gogh's contemporaries, but the reason I don't know them is that they're in the silent graveyard of people who are good for a season, who took the money that modern IYI intellectual types say that Van Gogh should have gotten at the time, but their work didn't survive. And obviously movies as a medium are way younger than the other visual arts like painting or sculpture or similarly. But I tried to reconcile that same thing, that like movies, especially as a cultural phenomenon, are incredibly hot. Like Avatar was what it might even still be the biggest grossing movie of all time. And you can do fat-tailed regressions on like the gross of movies relative to their effects on the bottom line of a studio, but Avatar, while it was like an incredible runaway success, in my opinion, will not be preserved in the canon 100 years from now, despite its technical achievement. And to me, what the latent lesson I learned was, just as I opened with, if someone puts enough craftsmanship into their work, and it relates to what I mentioned when we were talking about cooking, and that you had said that you learned and disciplined yourself for software development. If a person loves the process of constructing a movie, of editing it, of creating a form in which it is paced correctly, and that the ideas are salient, but then also presented that function within the rest of it. Like if someone loves that process well enough, they will create a product that people may or may not appreciate at the time, but it will survive. That people will be rewatching it 20, 50, 100 years from now, even after other ones that might have made more money are being forgotten.
You know what's funny about that? As you mentioned that, what came to mind is the Wachowskis, right? And they were saying that if you watch interviews of them when they were younger, they're talking about how they used to write 10,000 pages and pages of various ideas and stuff they put together. And their argument was that, and it's kind of talks to convexity, right? Even Shakespeare, a lot of people know his famous works, but they don't know that there's a whole pile of stuff that's kind of not that good. But it's good if you're like
nobody's read Richard III, right?
So this is what I mean by that, is that sometimes what the cost of becoming, as you said, a craftsman of the labor of your love, is that you're willing to eat the cost of the poorly produced results, because you know it's an investment in the better versions that you're going to create. It's sort of like how Walt Disney was saying that we don't make movies to make money, we make money to make movies, right? So it's sort of this weird flipping of the script to say, okay, the vision of this drives the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to create feedback loop into the vision. So in itself becomes self-sustaining, right? So you've created, in a way, a perpetual machine, which it's supposed to be not possible, but it actually can be if you have the right set of ideas that people follow. And it tends to be weird because I can draw lines to that on the following four vectors, right? So the first vector is this idea of Christianity, right? So I'm not a Christian, but I know enough Christians, and I live in Canada, so I kind of have a pretty good sense of what's going on with it. Is that if the ideas are self-sustaining enough, it just expands and maintains its own momentum, right? So you can never squash Christianity out of existence, right? It's just not going to happen. Same thing with the idea of democracy, right? Same thing with the idea of what we consider the Western approach to life and whatnot, and the Eastern Orthodox point of view with Buddhism. Some of the ideas that they propose are also intrinsically well placed, such that they actually allow people to do amazing things with it, all of their own construct. So it kind of gives them, the way I see it is, it gives you a rail on which to put your train on. And that train can go at its own speed, and it can go to that destination, and the destination is unknown. And that's what makes it beautiful, because if you watch The Matrix, you can watch that movie 1,000 times, and it's still good. I've watched 2001 Space Odyssey. I've watched that, oh my God, I don't know how many times I watched that, but Avatar, I watched it once, and I never wanted to watch it again. I don't know what it was. I'm like, yeah, okay, no. Right? I don't know what it is, but then you kind of gave me an idea about it as we were talking. It's this idea of the movie studios are trying to be in this position to be convex. They're just placing multiple bets and hoping one of them wins. That's the starting point. But some of them do this right and some of them do this wrong. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. What you want is you want an artist who's frugal. Right? It's an artist who cares deeply about the particular word placed in the particular sentence that the character utters. And not because they want that to become a catchphrase like "I'll be back," but it's just something that they know that character will be known for, right? So, like for example, Christopher Nolan's Joker. Why so serious? That's not even a sentence that really makes sense, but in the character's context, it makes complete and total sense, because that's an agent of chaos, and you're enwrapped into his world, and all of a sudden, in that context, it makes sense, but it bleeds out elsewhere. So his work is also of that sort. But what I find interesting is frugal is good, because a frugal person is a person who says, I have your attention for a specific period of time. And during that period of time that I have your attention, I want to give you back more than you've actually invested in this. Whereas a cheap person has the following intention. I have your attention, and that's all I care about. and I know you're not going to come back as a repeat customer, and I know you're not going to like this, but because I'm so cheap, I'll get so many people to pay attention to me that I'll make the money back for what I've done to do this process. And that's where they lose it, right? So that's where the artist that is cheap for the aspect of selling out, as Nassim would say, they're sold for just a little bit of money. They make their money, but they lose their membership as an artist. Whereas the ones who are frugal,
they sacrifice their integrity theoretically for some payoff that's bounded, and they can never get it back.
And they can never get it back. And no matter what they do to try to get it back, it doesn't work. So it's nicely tied into the overall arching aspect of everything we've been talking about, right? So it's this idea of things that have value, things that are timeless, things that are beautiful, things that require effort, things that are, and what's interesting about that particular line of reasoning is if you pursue it, you inherently become almost violently allergic to bullshit. Right? I think one of the common threads is we're all like that.
Oh yeah, and even a common person is like that outside of the domains in which they've been, for lack of a better word, brainwashed.
Yep.
If you were to get someone in a domain for which they don't have any strong feelings, they can detect nonsense very readily. It's just having been conditioned to think of, I don't know, CNN, or having been conditioned to love the Avengers series, or any number of other things, that irrational part of our minds that can be subverted takes over. And I can tell any number of people, guys, don't read too deeply into whatever the purple guy in Avengers does for like deep human meaning. And I will get so much pushback from some of my friends who really love comic books and so forth. But if I were to talk with them on the level about, what do you think Amazon really does to our spending habits, then suddenly they're like, well, I'm not exactly sure about some of the purchases that I've made myself, or that, they'll talk about things that, like I mentioned, they still preserve their intuition in their boredom and their skepticism, but simply because they haven't been overexposed.
Right. Yeah. No. So that's like I said, this has been a utterly fascinating and enjoyable conversation.
Thank you.
Did you have any other areas you wanted to sort of tap in on and discuss that you feel like we haven't covered?
No. I mean, I don't have the same institutional or frankly even intellectual pedigree as some of the other guests you've had on, like Joe or like David or like Shashank, if you're planning on having him, if you're having him already. So one of the things that I thought to myself prior to talking with you is like, well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to mention anything that's really, really juicy that hasn't already been gotten over with you and some of your other guests. That being said, such as I think I have my own novelty or differentiation between other people relative to like my own walk of life, and for the broader scope of risk taking, I think we've covered most of everything. The only thing I would want to probably elaborate on more was, as what Nassim would say, a celebration of what works, but in my estimation is closer to the phrase explanations are bullshit, is more just that idea that like we only find out the truth from testing it ourselves. Whether it's like, aesthetically, and you make your own estimations on, if Richard Prince is actually that good, or if Andy Warhol is actually that good, or if some guy you saw on Twitter says that he's made a lot of money trading doing X, then you do X yourself and it doesn't make money, then like, that he was just trying to sell you something. But it comes to, in my opinion, that deeper epistemic humility that Joe Norman talked about, that I'm sure has been brought up multiple times afterwards, that there is opacity in life that we're confronted with, that people around us still trudge through without any skepticism, that, we still have to trudge through ourselves, but at least we can be informed with how we do it relative to what we think we know.
Right.
And the reason I say it specifically with the phrase explanations are bullshit is that
Mm.
we explanations should be suspect, even when they're correct. Like, I'm not saying
Right.
that we cannot get conclusive answers. What I am saying, though, is that even if we know how things work, there's a it's like the green lumber fallacy. There's a fundamental difference between knowing how things work and knowing what a thing does to us.
Right.
I can tell someone all about like real measurable things about how the melatonin process takes place as soon as dusk starts and the sun has gone down and there is no more blue or UV light in the sky, and that eventually it pools in the brain at the time when the leptin hormone is being secreted by your fat cells, and that your brain does a certain accounting on energy requirements and fat burning at night for heat generation and all the other stuff that there is a known medical understanding regarding it, right? But I have never seen a melatonin molecule in my life. I physically cannot because it's tiny.
Right.
I couldn't even tell you what the chemical formula of melatonin is. I try to avoid using the word when talking to people about why my orange glasses work. It's just that in my experience, if I were to just tell them, oh yeah, like these orange glasses help me sleep and they've helped everyone I know who've used them very diligently sleep well, they just don't believe that. They need to be told a narrative to feel more comfortable about what it is that I'm telling them about, even if it's bullshit. Because as Scott Adams would say, when people generally are confronted between certainty or uncertainty, they'll always pick certainty, even if being certain is wrong.
Yep. No, it's true. There's ample evidence to validate that claim in the following regard, right? So go back to hunter-gatherer times, and we are all descendants of the people who formed tribes instead of the people who went out to discover the truth, right? So as a consequence, our natural inclination is to agree with everybody around us for the sake of social cohesion so that you can survive. So it's deeply rooted in that particular way. And what's interesting is, and I tell this to all my my guests that come on, and like, oh, well, if you're going to have, one day Nassim might come on your talk to talk with you guys, and I don't know what to say. I'm like, look, here's what's interesting about it. We're all decentralized nodes on this network, right? So there's stuff that I know that Nassim doesn't know. That's just how the world is going to be constructed. So your value is to be measured by me and by Ember because of the way we do it, and we respect Milton's original quote, which is what we start all the shows with, is that by the known rules of ancient liberty, you are an expression of life, and your experiences may be different, but that does not mean they're worse. And if they are bad, because we will get somebody on here who is probably not going to be as interesting to speak with as you are, that's okay, because somebody will learn from it, right? And there are very few people walking this planet that I would say that I deeply admire. Joe happens to be one of them, because Joe's the only guy besides Nassim and some of the other guys that when he says something, it almost always counterintuitively shatters my perception of what that problem is, but it actually validates my intuition of what that thing might be. And that's so hard to articulate.
As soon as he says it, like, you totally get it, even if you might not necessarily have arrived at that conclusion by yourself.
Right. And as a caveat, because Joe is also a human, there are times when he gets it wrong, which is cool, which is how we know that we're all in the same boat. And we're all just trying to help each other stay afloat so we don't become
Fortunately, Joe will admit it when it's presented to him.
Yeah. So there's always these layers built into it, and we respect and appreciate everybody's perspective, because, like I said, there's this weird hierarchical thing about podcasts. Oh, you're gonna go on Joe Rogan. I personally, there's a reason why we don't do this over video, right? Because this is about the conversation. The conversations to me are Lindy, in the sense that that's what we've always done. I guarantee you, there's a version of us sitting in a cave somewhere right now having this conversation in the alternate universe, right? But just we're talking about, hey, don't go over that rock. There's a snake hiding behind it, right? Something of that sort is what makes it interesting, because here we are talking. It's been almost 3 hours, and we've touched so many different topics. Our mutual. I didn't know I thought I was one of the only guys who liked poetry and literature in the Ruri crew. Thank God there's more. I'm sure David liked it too, because he sort of gives me hints and intimations about it. And so it feels kind of nice to see that other aspect of it is still there. Because most of the guys are, either engineers or they're traders.
It's a self-selecting filter that's led people to that way generally.
Exactly, and that's our strength in one way, because we're not exactly what they are, we can step outside of that realm and we can actually facilitate this kind of conversation, right? Because if you brought on everybody who talked about finance and fat tails, 3 conversations later, nobody's interested, right?
Well, you've heard everything to be told, like.
Right. But if you somehow meld the ideas of Shakespeare into user interfaces and software, well, now that leaves something for somebody else to imagine about, right? So hopefully somebody takes it there. And I really wanted to thank you and extend my gratitude for you coming on this show. And
thank you very much for having me. It was an honor.
No problem. Ember, did you want to have anything left to say to Matthias?
No, that was an awesome conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. It was one of the best that we had.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it a lot.
It really was.
Credit to you guys.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right, take care, guys. It was awesome.
I really appreciate it. Have a good one, guys.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we have. The truth is, any worthy conversation you'll ever have will inherently be a risky conversation, as long as it's open and honest, where ideas are exchanged and emotions swirl. Thank you for listening, be anti-fragile, and carry on the ancient tradition in your own unique way, by saying what only you can say and doing what only you can do. Abiding by Milton's words, this is Ember Sadat signing off, wishing you the very best of worthy and risky conversations.